It begins in 1861. I have just inherited the throne of the Netherlands. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276 Australia's Harvest Season. Britain and the Russian Empire held a second round of negotiations in the Kingdom of Belgium. Although both sides seemed to be very serious about the talks, they failed to reach an agreement in the end. As a result, the second round of armistice negotiations failed. At the same time as the assassination, on the battlefield in the Balkan Peninsula, because Britain and Russia obviously did not want to continue the war, and the Ottoman Empire was afraid to act rashly, peace briefly appeared there, and people seemed to see the dawn of peace. But is it really so? William IV disagreed, because on his desk, there was a list of weapons listed by the Russian Empire. If the Netherlands agrees to the Russian Empire's request, what will the Russian Empire do? After William IV drank a sip of tea, he seemed to be in a trance for a long time before staring at Prime Minister Thorbecke and asked. Thorbecke said mysteriously, if these 50,000 rifles join the Russian Empire, then the Balkan Peninsula will continue. Of course, Alexander II is wild and unpredictable. It is possible that he has other plans. William IV turned his eyes slightly and looked at the map of the Balkan Peninsula. He paused on the Kingdom of Greece, but he was not worried, but a little cautious. Then he moved to the Balkan Peninsula. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly moved his eyes eastward and fell on a place. His face showed interest, as if he realized something, and he said, I really want to know what Alexander II wants to do. On September 25, 1866, the Netherlands announced in a high-profile manner that it would provide 50,000 Mauser rifles to the Russian Empire. It immediately attracted many doubts. Why? Because Britain and Russia had just failed in the peace talks in Belgium, and the Netherlands announced that it had negotiated with the Russian Empire to win the most powerful rifle business in Europe. This was an invisible blow to those who had originally expected Britain and Russia. Because this means that the Russian Empire is replenishing its ammunition depot, and the increase in this weapon is obviously a coercion against Britain. In the British Isles, many people speculate that this is Alexander II's psychological warfare against Queen Victoria, indicating that if Britain no longer makes concessions in the negotiation field, then the Russian Empire can only continue. But some people also believe that the Russian Empire did not intend to negotiate peace from the beginning, and now negotiating with Britain is just delaying time to digest the results of the Romanian War that has just been captured. These two views have led to completely different positions in the British cabinet and even the House of Commons. Some people advocate continuing to negotiate with the Russian Empire in order to relieve the pressure brought by the Balkan War. Some people think that there is no need to continue the talks, because the Russian Empire is just consuming Britain's prestige, which makes Britain's allies look at Britain with an unreliable aura. The Netherlands' sale of 50,000 Mauser rifles to the Russian Empire has triggered a great debate in Britain, which can be said to be stunned. The United States of America, under the attention of William IV, secretly completed the increase of troops to the northwest Washington state to 50,000. When I think of the already turbulent water in London, if there is an external force stirring it, what will be the effect at that time? At the same time, the Dutch government began to increase the propaganda of newspapers in various countries secretly controlled by the Netherlands on news that is friendly to the image of the Netherlands, and guided the war between Britain and the United States of America in a direction that is beneficial to the Netherlands. Under the false appearance of the world's stability, it has been fueled by the Netherlands, and the undercurrent is surging again. As a pusher, William IV of the Netherlands is accelerating its own construction tide. After 4 years of full efforts to rush into the construction tide, Australia in the far east of the Netherlands ushered in the harvest season. On September 25, 1866, part of the coastal railway in the southeastern coastal area of Australia was finally completed. The line from Melbourne, the capital of William Province, that is, Victoria, to Sydney, the capital of New South Wales, was officially opened on this day. This is Australia's most important economic artery. Its opening will further promote the economic prosperity of the Australian continent. On the same day, the railway from Melbourne to Adelaide, the capital of South Australia in the west, was officially opened. This is the artery for the transfer of strategic resources deployed by the Dutch military industry. Melbourne transports the eastern coast to Adelaide, and the weapons manufactured thereafter are continuously transported to the East and even East India. In the western province of Western Australia, the railway from the capital Perth to Kalgoorlie, a major town in the central part of the province, was also officially open to traffic. If this is opened, it will promote the development of weapons in Adelaide even more. With the transportation of minerals from the west to the east, the industrial economy of Sydney and Melbourne will take a complete leap. As long as the population keeps up, the three things of minerals, industrial products and markets will be comparable to the United States of America. Even under the division of the United States, Australia's geographical location will be more advantageous. In the northern province of Northern Australia, a railway is being built to connect Darwin, the capital of the Timor Sea, to the city of Nimbulwa next to Lyman Bay in the Gulf of Carpentaria. It is expected to be officially opened in 1869. If this 6-year-old railway is opened, it will greatly promote the economic development of the Northern Australia province, and it will also be greatly promoted in terms of safety. Because of this, the local government has done its best to introduce Indigenous labour. Like it, Queensland in the east is also in a construction boom, and even more than it. As a major grain-producing province in Australia, transportation is a problem. Therefore, with the consent of the Thorbecke cabinet, Queensland obtained the consent of Amsterdam and took the lead in building 4 railways in Australia at the same time. East-West Railways, Brisbane to Western Quilpie, Rockhampton to Western Longreach, Townsville to Western Duchess, Cairns to Normanton in the southeast of Western Carbondale Bay. These 4 railways are still under construction and are estimated to be completed and open to traffic around 1870. The north-south Cairns-Townsville-Rockhampton-Brisbane has been completed and open to traffic. Even Brisbane began to cooperate with New South Wales to plan the interprovincial railway connection from Brisbane to Sydney. In addition, the construction of Adelaide, the capital of South Australia, to the north to Alice Springs, a major town in the southern part of Northern Australia, and Adelaide to the west to Kalgoorlie, a major town in the central part of Western Australia. These 2 are the largest long-term plans of the Dutch government. Due to the long span and complex terrain, it is estimated that it will take until around 1873 to complete the construction and opening to traffic. Other branches are added slowly. Chapter 277, Cheap Aboriginal Labour in the 19th Century. With the opening of those railways, Australia's traffic environment has been greatly eased, and more immigration has been promoted. Even now, because of the war, under the propaganda of the Netherlands, many people in Europe have begun to choose to take refuge there. As for whether they will regret it the most, who knows? Even in the United States of America, it is said that many people are willing to immigrate there, especially in the southeast of Sydney and Melbourne. Among them, the Dutch are the majority, accounting for more than 60%, with a number of about 100,000. At the meeting of the Dutch Privy Council, Interior Minister John Rule made an overview of the railways in Far East Australia. William Ivey's long-calm heart was a little boiling. This was a construction that he promoted, and now it has slowly borne fruit. How can he not be excited? Australia is almost like his child. He asked for it from Britain in 1862 and watched it change from a barren continent to a place where millions of Dutch people live today. From a wilderness path to the current railway crawling all over the ground, this was completed in just a few years, which is almost a miracle. When he first started planning, he thought that it would take more than 10 or even 20 years to build a railway. After all, the current technology is not as advanced as that of later generations. But he was wrong, and he was very wrong. Because in the plan of John Muller and others, the few lines that were open were completed in just about 4 years. I didn't believe it at the time, but the answer in front of me made my doubts disappear. Now I suddenly realized that this is not the later world. Now there is no need to expropriate land, and there is no need for too high labor costs, especially the latter one, which is very important. In the past, there were not many railways on the Australian mainland. Why? Because the small population is one reason, but the other is that a lot of land is occupied by capitalists and British aristocrats. It is very difficult to collect it, and the compensation can make their government pay a lot. The labor cost is even more sky-high. You must know that when the world's per capita income was about $10,000, Australia's per capita income reached $50,000. If 10,000 workers are needed to build a railway, then they will have to pay them $500 million a year, not to mention other labor security and welfare expenses. This is very stressful for the finance. But this era is different. Why? Because where is the ceiling of per capita income in each country? It is the Netherlands. After several years of development, the white people in the Netherlands have surpassed the UK, with an average income of £90 per person, while the UK is only £80, and the United States is less than half of the Netherlands. Although the natives of the Netherlands are slightly better, the Dutch government is not a charity. It only gives different bonuses. For example, the natives of Australia and East India give £20 a year, while the natives of Africa, including Madagascar, are £10. Your Majesty, we have recruited more than 100,000 African natives, and more than 200,000 East Indian natives and Australian natives. John Lur said carefully, the annual salary expenditure of African natives is about £1 million, while the natives of Australia and East India need £4 million. William IV has digested the cheap news brought by these hundreds of thousands of laborers, and at the same time he couldn't help but smile bitterly. The labor force of this era is not the kind of young master and uncle type of labor force in later generations. There's no 8-hour work system here. The working hours of these cheap laborers are often maintained for more than 12 hours a year, and this time is signed in the contract. Don't think it's inhumane. It was like that in those days. Even in Africa, every time there was a recruitment, there were still many people lining up in the hope of being selected for this good job. After all, the income of £15 is just the same for the lower-class people in many European countries. It can be said that for Africans, it is not an exaggeration to say that it is an upper-class salary, so why would they not want to go? Therefore, the working attitude and mental outlook of the workers are definitely not something that those who watch videos and read novels can understand. Even William IV thought that perhaps people living in the 1980s and 1990s could still feel it. After all, there were fewer black and white TVs in that era, and they were diligent and hard-working. What is Australia's annual fiscal expenditure? William IV asked the Minister of Finance Jan van Capello next to him. Jan van Capello, last year it was more than £10 million. What a huge number. You know, the GDP of the Netherlands is only about £300 million now, and the fiscal revenue is just over £50 million. William IV was amused to see Jan van Capello's distressed look. Sure enough, no one who manages money is generous. How much was Australia's fiscal revenue last year? £9.7 million. The difference is not that big. William IV was relieved when he heard this. This is the most important thing. If the expenditure is not proportional to the income, the consequences will be very serious. Just like the current UK, because of various war supports, the fiscal deficit has appeared, which is a headache for the Clayton cabinet. Needless to say, the Russian Empire borrowed 50 million Dutch guilders, worth £2 million, from the Netherlands some time ago, just to maintain the war. William IV agreed to it in order to get an annual interest rate of 10%. After all, the two major social forces that made a fortune in the war were arms dealers and banks. Now the Netherlands has become the two areas that William IV hated the most, and it is also the world's leader, which makes him feel helpless in life. I don't want to be a bad person, but the environment makes me the most annoying person in my heart. Australia has entered the regular stage, so the Netherlands migration plan can be accelerated, especially the factories on both the military and civilian sides, and security, which can be accelerated at that time. Looking at the map of Australia, the guides began to plan the intensive construction plan of Australian military bases. In fact, Australia's total economic output has reached 1/5 of the Netherlands, plus the East Indies 1/5, which is almost 2/5 of the Netherlands. In other words, if the Netherlands is calculated at £300 million, the East Indies and the Australian continent now account for £120 million of the Netherlands' GDP. This is higher than the GDP of Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Greece and other countries, which shows the strength of the Netherlands' comprehensive national strength. With the rise of hot weapons in the 19th century, arms discussions have completely become a political force, affecting the decision-making of European and American governments. War is the result of many factors intertwined, especially the struggle between the big countries, and there are arms dealers behind almost all the struggles. Arms dealers are defense contractors in Europe and the United States, and are the so-called military-industrial complex. In some countries, when the government is not strong enough, the war is basically started because their country has become a Frankenstein monster that cannot be controlled without war. These arms dealers produce and develop various weapons like civilian industrial products every day, so the accumulation of small amounts makes a lot. When the producing countries cannot sell them in peace, wars and conflicts are needed to open up the market. The British occupied such a large share in the past few years, which is why the Netherlands, although second, is still far behind. Chapter 278. Will the Kingdom of Siam become the grave of France? William IV carefully observed the treacherous trajectory of Britain's successful arms sales and found that Britain was almost creating wars. The anti-Napoleonic War of that year made Britain earn a lot of money by selling weapons to European countries, making the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Sweden, the Austrian Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia and other countries its arms dealers. After that, in the Crimean War of 1853, the anti-Russian coalition was formed, and the French Empire was pulled into their arms dealer customer base. Even Italy and the Ottoman Empire bought more weapons than France, and Britain made a lot of money. In less than 10 years, under the pressure of the accumulated weapons of arms dealers, the division of the United States was finally promoted, supporting the Confederate States of the South, which had a poor industrial base and could not be self-reliant in weapons. Britain transported all the mountains of weapons to the south of the United States, and British arms dealers made a fortune in the war. William IV naturally followed suit, and even recently dragged Britain into it behind the scenes. This way, Britain's own weapons were not enough, so where would they sell them? This gave the Netherlands the opportunity to occupy Britain's original international market. However, the Netherlands would also develop new markets. For example, William IV was thinking about the intelligence he saw some time ago. Britain and France were gradually advancing their colonies on the East-South Asian peninsula in the Far East. The Netherlands hesitated whether to push the situation around the Kingdom of Siam to make it more tense, so that the sales of Dutch weapons would be smoother. However, William IV was worried that if this happened, the peaceful situation in the Far East would enter a turbulent period. Therefore, he has always been very cautious, fearing that a single move would affect the development trend of the Netherlands in the Far East, especially the market for industrial products. If war breaks out, the market of 8 million people in the Siamese Empire may shrink sharply, which will make the industrial products of the Dutch East Indies and the Australian continent lose a reliable market. Although it is said that South America can be expanded to fill the gap, and even the big country in the Far East can increase its offensive, but because Britain and France dominate there, the Dutch Syrian ranks third in market share, but it is still difficult to completely eat up the market that the Kingdom of Siam may lose. However, there are both disadvantages and advantages. Looking at the current survival environment of the Kingdom of Siam under the double attack of Britain and France, it is quite ironic. What the Dutch Thorbecke cabinet government could not do after several years of hard work, but now the expansion of France in South Vietnam and the expansion of Britain from Lower Burma to Upper Burma have made it easy to settle the situation. Rama IV had always wanted to balance the relationship between the Kingdom of Siam and European countries, especially recently applying to join the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the International Red Cross, the International Women's League and other organizations, but he was perfunctory about increasing defense spending and purchasing more advanced weapons from the Netherlands, in order not to provoke Britain and France, and to continue to maintain neutrality between the four major countries in the Far East, Britain, France, the Netherlands and Spain. Thorbecke even complained to him about his dissatisfaction with Rama IV, and in a fit of rage, he threatened to push his crown prince Chulalongkorn, who is a man of insight and a wise man, to the throne. Fortunately, he was appeased by William IV and calmed down. Having said that, just like the Netherlands and Europe, the Kingdom of Siam was facing the industrial product offensive of the Netherlands, as well as the northward advance of France and South Vietnam to expand its border with the Kingdom of Siam. Now there was intentional or unintentional infiltration into Cambodia in the east of the Kingdom of Siam, which made Rama IV very uneasy. In the west, Britain's infiltration from Lower Burma to Upper Burma inevitably led to unrest in Laos in the north of the Kingdom of Siam, which made Rama IV even more uneasy. The Kingdom of Siam seemed to have just realized that it could not avoid becoming a battleground for Western countries. Prime Minister Thorbecke, Britain and France have ambitions for the territory there, but the Netherlands does not, which naturally makes the Kingdom of Siam lean towards the latter. So recently, it has frequently shown goodwill to the Netherlands. Even Rama IV, after passing through Anna, agreed to the Netherlands' long-standing request to join the Dutch military alliance. The Kingdom of Siam completely relies on the Netherlands for security. It is precisely because of the treacherous situation in East-South Asia that since this year, The Kingdom of Siam has also purchased batches of Dutch arms manufactured in the Dutch Far East. It even expressed that it wants the Netherlands to help expand several naval bases in the Bay of Bangkok and the ports of Kamal-Atman and Sihanoukville in the eastern Cambodia region. Of course, Songkhla Port, Phuket Port, etc., which are close to the British colony of Malaya, also want to ask the Netherlands for expansion in the name of expansion, but in fact, they want the Netherlands to help stop Britain's dissatisfaction and ambition to expand northward in Malacca. Your Majesty, the Kingdom of Siam now needs our help. I think it's time for us to ask the country for the place we wanted back then. William IV hesitated, and finally agreed to Thorbecke's idea. The Netherlands seems to be in the Far East, and compared to Britain and France, it has been quieter recently. Well, my Prime Minister, wait a minute. If we bring it up now, we will only provoke Rama IV's dislike. Doesn't France have ambitions in Cambodia? It just so happens that Napoleon II has been too idle recently. We should wait for both sides to suffer losses before we can join the game. In that case, Rama IV will beg us for it, instead of us having to pressure him now, and the other party will be unwilling to give it to us. Thorbecke agreed after hearing this. William IV, France has been making frequent moves in Mexico recently, but because the Confederate States of America has been focusing its energy on fighting the Confederate States of America in the North to prevent the disadvantage of the North from expanding in the South, it has recently stopped clashing with France in the direction of Mexico. Therefore, France has made smooth progress and can be said to be reaping the benefits. The same is true in Europe. Britain's international status has declined, while France seems to have improved. The national strength is also slowly recovering from the damage in Mexico. This is not necessarily a good thing for the Netherlands. We need a pit for France to fall into. Napoleon III, assisted by Olivier, bullies the good and fears the evil, and dares not easily confront Britain. This is why he was willing to give up control of the Suez Canal to Britain and pretend to be indifferent when his former ally Italy, the former Kingdom of Sardinia, rebelled and became Britain's younger brother. Therefore, I estimate that Napoleon II will not easily fight with Britain in the Far East. The biggest situation is that he will try to reach an understanding privately on the issue of infiltrating the Kingdom of Siam. The two countries will act separately in the East and the West and not interfere with each other. This is not a good thing for the Netherlands. Therefore, the Netherlands needs the Kingdom of Siam, which is considered a weak country in the eyes of France, to secretly support each other and trap France, even the kind of trap that cannot be easily pulled out, just like Britain in North America. Only then can France be weakened, and then William IV finally said to Thorbecke in surprise, in the end, Prussia's ambitions can be lured out, both sides will suffer losses, and the three carriages of Western Europe will be completely weakened. Thanks to book friends Gem, Chess, CC, and book friend 2020131842581994 for their rewards, and thanks to other book friends and various votes for support. Chapter 279, The Governor-General of Canada was tricked. 1866, half a month had passed since the leak of the United States of America. The anti-British sentiments such as protests and demonstrations in the United States of America eased slightly. Just when Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and the Clayston cabinet government and the people were about to breathe a sigh of relief, thinking that as long as a period of time passed, the incident would disappear without leaving any traces, but they never expected that there would be a sudden turn of events and an unexpected incident that made them extremely angry. It turned out that some time ago, when the United States of America was in a serious confrontation in Maryland, Washington, in the east, and Virginia, where Richmond was located in the south, it was also pressing southward along the Mississippi River. With the help of Britain, the east began to lose, but soon balanced the other side. In the case of an almost draw, the North federal state in the middle was considered to have an advantage, and it advanced from Kentucky to Tennessee in the south, occupying half of the entire North, including Nashville, the capital of Tennessee. However, under the command of Robert Lee, the South managed to hold off the occupation of the central North and began to achieve a balance. The North was naturally unwilling to give up, so Lincoln's new general, General Grant, turned his attention to the West. Because that is where the American Confederacy has its advantages. Grant looked at President Lincoln and Secretary of the Interior Washburn, who were also of Irish descent. He also looked at Vice President Andrew Johnson, who was of Dutch descent, Secretary of State Seward, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, etc., who were of German descent. In the Lincoln government, the Irish were the only ones, while the Germans and Dutch were second only to them. The Irish had always been on good terms with both sides, but they also learned from the English government to treat the European continent, and in the United States, they also implemented balancing measures, taking advantage of the contradictions between the Dutch and Germans in Europe, and letting the Irish fishermen benefit. In particular, the political soil of the Dutch was mainly in big cities, and the Germans also focused on urban industrialization, which was different from the Irish who mainly participated in planting. Therefore, the political demands of the three parties were contradictory, especially the Irish and Germans were rivals in economic territory, which made them rivals in politics. However, because of the strength of their homeland, the Germans have always kept a low profile in the eastern United States, fearing that the Kingdom of Prussia in Europe would target them and accuse them of treason. Moreover, the Dutch have been deeply rooted in the eastern part of the United States for more than 200 years, and are more powerful than the Germans. Therefore, although the population of the United States is large, the technology is not inferior to that of the Dutch because of the close exchanges with the German Confederation. It's just that many territories have been taken by the Dutch. Therefore, Seward wanted to avoid the eastern part occupied by the Dutch and the central part occupied by the Irish, and had already planned for the Germans to develop their own base in the west. Among them, the west he preferred was California on the eastern Pacific coast. Only by taking it, the Germans could gain a foothold. However, recently, it has been repeatedly destroyed by the Dutch, and even the Irish seem to have destroyed his idea. At least the Hawaiian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, which he had originally seen as the key overseas areas of the Germans in the future, were taken by the Dutch. This made him very suspicious, including Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of the Treasury James Speed, who were using their ethnic convenience to interfere with the rise of their Germans. President Lincoln, however, looked for someone to stand by and watch, obviously wanting to restrain him, and once again used the annoying method of taking advantage of others to do the same to them. Thinking of this, Seward looked at Grant, the current highest military leader of the United States of America, with a little dissatisfaction. Especially thinking of his German-American Lieutenant General William Sherman in the Central Army. Then, thinking of the current Canadian plan he proposed recently, I think there should be a result now. September 27, 1866. A businessman in Spokane, Washington, the United States of America had a dispute with the Indians on the Canadian border. The German Washington was suddenly killed by the Canadian Indians across the border. 3 police officers from Washington state crossed the border to enforce the law and wanted to arrest the Indian who had fled to the British colony of Canada, Creston Town, but the 5 British Creston law enforcement officers there provided him with asylum and were unwilling to hand over the suspect. In the end, both sides opened fire, and a police officer on the American side was seriously injured, while someone on the British side was slightly injured. So the Spokane Police Department in Washington state urgently reported to the Washington state government, which also reported to the federal government of the United States. The Federal Republic of America then publicly wrote to the British government to express its dissatisfaction, and urged the British government to urge the Governor-General's Office of Canada to hand over the suspect, and let the Governor-General's Office of Canada let the 5 law enforcement officers accept the legal review of the Federal Republic of America. If the evidence proves that it is a crime of intentional injury, they will face judicial sanctions from the Federal Republic of America. The British Clayton government has not yet made a statement, but the Governor-General's Office of Canada has confirmed that it will not accept the request of the federal government of the United States and does not agree with the one-sided statement of the Federal Republic of America. Canadian Governor-General Chalk Stanley Monk also stated that Canada will not accept any request for an apology from any Canadian police officer, nor will it believe that Canadian police officers are wrong in enforcing the law in Canada. He urged the Lincoln government not to waste its efforts in Canada to protect all its citizens. Canadian Governor-General Monk was a Tory, so the slap on the face of Prime Minister Clayton, the Whig, was loud. Obviously, Canada did not seem to be very fond of Prime Minister Clayton, which made the latter very angry. However, the United States of America seemed to be unaware of this. On September 29, the United States of America announced that the Indian was a contraband. Moreover, the evidence of the United States of America showed that this annoying partner seemed to be intentionally or unintentionally the mastermind behind the scenes was Governor Monk. This seemed to have given Prime Minister Clayton a machete to cut off the Tory party's opposition opponent in Britain's most important overseas colony. Clayton was merciless. On October 4, After investigation, he announced that the evidence was true and announced the arrest of Chalk Stanley Monk. But Chalk Stanley Monk was unwilling to surrender. He announced that he did not agree with Clayton's accusation of framing his opponent, and asked Disraeli of the Tory party to come out to administer justice. He also filed a complaint with Queen Victoria, demanding the removal of Clayton, the interim Prime Minister, and accusing him of agreeing with the United States of America to frame the British aristocracy and being a British defector. The United States of America naturally stood up, accusing the other party of tyranny and demanding that the other party hand over the prisoner. How could Chalk Stanley Monk listen at this time? After all, he just accused Clayton of listening to the Americans. Little did he know that he was playing into the hands of the Lincoln government. Chapter 280, Forming a Black Army. So the United States of America actually dispatched a large army to occupy the small town of Creston in the north, and pursued the Indian prisoner with more than 10,000 troops on the pretext that he had fled westward. In just over 10 days, the entire southern part of the province was captured, from the small town of Creston in the southeast of British Columbia, Canada, to the cities of Kelowna, Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, and Kamloops in the middle of the south, and continued to advance northward, and all Canadian police officers along the way became one of the suspects' accomplices. After taking down Prince George, a city in central British Columbia, the British side and European countries reacted. This was not a pursuit of a prisoner, but the United States of America wanted to occupy the province. Oh my God, the United States of America dared to do this. How could they do this? On October 8, 1866, after taking down Prince George, the United States of America took down Queen Charlotte Island on the morning of the same day. On the same day, Secretary of State Washington personally held a press conference. He said that the United States of America had sovereignty over British Columbia because the Indiana leader of the province led his people to the United States of America. They were dissatisfied with the exploitation and invasion of Britain. The United States of America did this out of humanitarianism and to maintain peace on the border. Therefore, the Lincoln government was willing to accept the idea of local people wanting to join the United States of America. The entire United States of America cheered for this. Since the Southern American Confederation wanted to be independent, the military and people in the North were unstable. Now that such good news has been obtained, it can be said that it has greatly boosted the pride of the country. There are even polls showing that President Lincoln's public opinion is second only to the first president of all time, Washington, and is on par with the third president, Thomas Jefferson. You should know that Thomas Jefferson was the first Secretary of State of the United States and the founder of the Democratic-Republican Party, founded in 1893, the predecessor of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. He led the party to defeat the Federalist Party formed by the first Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, and even caused the latter to disappear in the 1820s. In the end, his Democratic-Republican Party split into the current two parties. And you should know that Thomas Jefferson is not just that simple. He is one of the three founding heroes with the first President Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and is the only president of the United States who has served 3 terms. Lincoln was able to suppress him because he was affected by the Civil War and because he promulgated a series of bills such as the Land Act and the Abolition Act. In addition, he resisted the invasion of Britain. Just like Thomas Jefferson negotiated with Napoleon I of France to buy Louisiana in the Mississippi River region, Lincoln also took British Columbia, Canada. This was the only new territory acquired by the United States of America in the past decade. Therefore, it is understandable that Lincoln could gain such public support. Compared with the excitement of the United States, Britain was extremely angry. On October 10, 1866, British Foreign Secretary Russell personally held a press conference to strongly condemn the United States of America on behalf of the British government and demanded that the United States of America take British Canada. Canada belongs to Britain, not an inch of land. We will not tolerate the erosion of this British territory, absolutely not. You should know that Britain has enough tools to do this. If the Lincoln government wants to try, everyone can wait and see. When someone from a British newspaper asked Russell, the British Foreign Secretary, if the United States did not withdraw, Britain was prepared to deal with the United States, Russell made it clear that they would respond strongly. As for how to respond, he chose to avoid it and just said that everyone could wait and see. The United States seemed to be calm and didn't seem to care much. Secretary of State Seward said on October 12 that he had completed the capture of 90% of Britain and would complete it before the 15th. This further angered London. Since there were less than 40,000 British troops stationed in Canada, and the Canadian territory north of the Great Lakes needed to be wary of the United States in the south, there were not enough troops to support the West, and if there were too few, it would be ineffective. So the British government once again set its sights on British India. On October 14, 1866, London, England announced that it would send 20,000 troops from the British Isles to enter southeastern Canada from the Atlantic Ocean to strengthen defense. At the same time, 20,000 native troops and 10,000 British troops were dispatched from the Indian subcontinent in the British colony to cross the Pacific Ocean from the Indian Ocean to land on the Pacific coast of Western Canada before November 10, which would effectively block the invaders of the United States of America. At the same time, the supply of weapons to the Confederate States of the South would be increased. The Confederate States of the South seemed to be isolated by Britain, so it seemed to be dancing and launched a counterattack against the Northern Confederation, changing the defensive state of the past few weeks. However, this seemed to have been expected by the Lincoln government. Although the South wanted to take the opportunity to get rid of the dilemma of being suppressed, there was no change in the end. Of course, this is also because Britain and the United States of America are only fighting a war of words and have not taken action yet, so the other side still has the energy to deal with their provocation. The United States of America was not to be outdone. It also increased its troops and formed an unprecedented 70,000 troops in British Columbia, Canada. After taking the province on October 15, it actually launched an attack on Alberta in the east on the 17th. Moreover, this time, not only did it attack from west to east, but the United States of America also sent troops from Montana in the south to the north to attack Alberta and Saskatchewan respectively. Britain was simply stunned. Is the United States of America going to go to war with the British colony? Are they really not afraid of the retaliation of the British full-scale attack? Can the United States of America withstand it? So the British Isles recruited 30,000 troops again, plus the 20,000 people who had been transporting ships in the Atlantic Ocean before. A total of 50,000 people will be dispatched to defend Canada, plus Canada's 40,000, 90,000 Canadian troops. Britain is confident that this is enough to put a lot of pressure on the United States of America. If the Indian Native Army and the 10,000 British regular troops also landed in the West, then there would be an unprecedented 120,000 troops, which is enough to compare with the army of the Kingdom of Denmark, a medium-sized country in Europe. Many British people once thought that this would make the American federal government see the serious attitude of Britain and change color. But they were disappointed. The Lincoln government was even contrary to their expectations. On October 20, 1866, Interior Secretary Washburn announced that the American federal government would increase its troops by 100,000, among which people of color and newly freed blacks could join the army. For this reason, blacks throughout the American federal government were extremely enthusiastic. Perhaps moved by Lincoln's kindness, the blacks actually completed 50,000 troops composed of strong blacks in less than a week. Seeing this, the whites were naturally unwilling to be outdone, so the 50,000 troops were also completed on October 23. At this time, European countries realized that the American federal government was obviously not prepared to compromise with Britain this time. Chapter 281, Second Pacific War. The changes in North America made Europe surprisingly quiet, but outside Europe, European forces were also making waves everywhere. It turned out that in South America, the navies of the Brazilian Empire and the Kingdom of Portugal conducted naval exercises in the offshore waters between Porto Alegre and Rio de Janeiro from October 18 to November 3, 1866. The two countries invited Italy as an observer country. Paraguay has no offshore waters, but it has an ally, the French Empire. So France also conducted exercises off the coast of Uruguay and returned to the port of Cayenne in French Guiana soon after. Britain even conducted naval exercises between South Africa and Chile. Okay. The countries in South America felt threatened, so Argentina proposed to the Netherlands that the members of the South American Union conduct naval exercises, and William IV naturally did not object. However, there was a disagreement on the location of the exercise. Argentina wanted to place the performance in the offshore waters of Argentina, especially outside the mouth of the La Plata River between Uruguay and Argentina. For Argentina, this can effectively intimidate the Brazilian and Portuguese alliances. Argentina naturally did not want to face these powerful countries, so it took the opportunity to show that Argentina was not alone. However, Venezuela and Colombia believe that the exercise should be held outside the Venezuelan Gulf in the Caribbean Sea, which is the border between Venezuela and Colombia, and outside the bay is the Dutch offshore territory of Aruba Island. However, in the end, several South American countries hesitated, because if it was in the Caribbean Sea, it would be too close to the Confederate States of America in the South. Not to mention the reaction of the Confederate States, it seemed to be a provocation, as if deliberately showing support for the Confederate States of America. This seemed unnecessary for Venezuela and Colombia. Therefore, Argentina proposed this direction idea, and finally Venezuela, Colombia and Ecuador also agreed to the seriousness of the problem of holding it there. As for Argentina, it is possible that several northern countries are unwilling to conflict with Brazil and Portugal, and are even more unwilling to easily get involved in the situation of confronting the French Empire. Among them, the Confederate States of America is particularly strong. This can make all countries understand. After all, they are still offending the British Empire. If there is a dispute with the French Empire again, then the Lincoln government will definitely be under unprecedented pressure. During the process, the Kingdom of the Netherlands did follow suit and did not express its position. In the end, everyone compromised because the United States of America was at war with the Confederate States of America and Britain, so they finally chose to conduct the exercise in the Pacific Ocean. Ecuador should even propose to conduct the exercise in the Pacific Ocean outside the Bay of Guayaquil, advocating that the Netherlands' extensive islands in the South Pacific Ocean can be in the Pacific Ocean with Colombia and Ecuador, but the location of the exercise is in the Hawaiian Islands. Because this can effectively avoid the current war in North America and temporarily not intervene in the disputes in South America. So the Hawaiian Islands became the first military exercise destination of the South American Confederation under such circumstances. On November 1, 1866, the 6 countries of the South American Alliance conducted a 4-day army exercise on Maui, the second largest island in the Hawaiian Islands, and then on November 5, they conducted naval warship exercises off the coast of Oahu, the third largest island. This exercise was conducted around the Hawaiian Islands. On November 7, when the British Indian Ocean Navy passed the Hawaiian Islands and prepared to go north to Canada for support, the two sides almost clashed with Britain because of the United States of America. In the end, the Netherlands stopped the confrontation after communicating with Britain in the name of this being an exercise. Although everyone was distressed because the conflict that the United States seemed to deliberately provoke made everyone unhappy, it must be said that doing so did not violate the Treaty of the South American Confederation. So everyone could only sigh that they came to the Central Pacific and actually caused trouble. This exercise has attracted attention, not only from the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the United States of America and South America, but also from Britain, Spain and even Japan, and Tsarist Russia. After all, this was held in front of their colonies or territories, and they could not ignore it. The magnificent scene is very shocking. It is different from the cold weapons of more than 100 years ago. It is not that you can kill the enemy by holding a sword or shield, riding a war horse, and rushing forward. Now it is the era of hot weapons such as guns, cannons, and warships like bunkers. It is an era that can kill the enemy in large areas without getting close to the body. A few days ago, I was invited to personally follow the Dutch Navy to the Hawaiian Islands with my successor. The beauty there is absolutely amazing all other places in the Netherlands. I am proud that the Netherlands has such a beautiful place. The military exercise in this beautiful place made me feel very distressed, but I also felt it was necessary. After all, beautiful things need to be maintained. No one knows whether thieves will invade and rob it one day. I personally interviewed the performances of the 6 countries of the South American Alliance, which was really shocking. Of course, this is my view from the perspective of the enemy. If we look at it from our standpoint, what we should be most proud of is being a citizen of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. This 6-country exercise is just the beginning. I guess if necessary, the 6 countries will conduct more similar exercises in the future. I even heard that the Confederation was going to invite a group of observer countries to watch the next exercise. By the way, my name is Addis, and I'm a reporter from the New Rotterdam newspaper. Not only was Addis's New Rotterdam newspaper reporting on the exercise, but newspapers from various American countries also reported it at the first time. This time, the South American Confederation created the first case in human history where military journalists followed military operations, making the entire exercise almost transparent to the journalists of the Confederation. It was extremely shocking, So journalists who were good at embellishment used their pens and paper to maximize the impact and make it the most realistic. This made the people of the Confederation feel the power brought by the Confederation and have more trust in the South American Confederation. On November 9, 1866, when the British Indian Ocean Transport Fleet supporting Canada was about to arrive at Queen Charlotte Island, Canada, the American Confederation appeared on Queen Charlotte Island and the port of Vancouver, and the navies of the two countries confronted each other. Just when the British fleet was about to start a fight with the American fleet, which was inferior to itself, it was suddenly attacked underwater. At the same time, the surface ships of the United States joined the battle. The huge British fleet suffered heavy losses except for limited counterattacks. Even the 30,000 soldiers on the transport fleet were bombed and sunk to the bottom of the sea, resulting in a loss of more than 20,000 people. However, the United States of America only lost 2 second-level sailing battleships. As for the source of the underwater attack, 3 were also sunk by the British Navy. When this news came out, the world was shocked. Everyone stopped what they were doing and was shocked. 20,000 people? Just gone? The last time the British Navy was attacked by an inexplicable underwater attack in the North Pacific, it suffered huge losses. This time, the United States of America obviously mastered the underwater weapon, which was absolutely a disaster for Britain. Many people speculated that this should be the latest weapon of the American alliance, the submarine. However, when did the submarine become so powerful? As a result, the submarine instantly became the focus of attention of all maritime countries, because its achievements were too brilliant. Chapter 282: The Davis Administration's Dilemma. Huh? So surprising, a fight has actually started. Hurry up and send a telegram to British Prime Minister Clayton and the Lincoln government of the United States to find out why the fight has started like this. Those bastards of the French intelligence agency didn't even get such important intelligence. Are they worthy of our salaries? These bastards. Napoleon III suddenly turned his guns and roared at Olivier in dissatisfaction. Today's news came too suddenly, without any signs. It made his recent deployment a little slow under the attack of this news, and he needed to start over. French Prime Minister Olivier rolled his eyes and said, "Your Majesty, since Britain has been attacked and suffered such heavy losses, I think London has not had the energy to focus on the Far East recently. I think we might as well take the opportunity to expand our presence in the East-South Asia Peninsula. South Vietnam is too small, and we have already expanded our presence in Mexico. In the Far East, we are far inferior to Britain, not to mention that we can't even compare to Spain there, and even the Netherlands. This is a shame for the French Empire." Napoleon III was successfully diverted when he heard this. "You are right, we should take the opportunity to get the most benefits." But what Olivier didn't know was that it was just because of his idea that the French Empire fell into a quagmire after Mexico. There was no sign of this war. Just like Napoleon III and his men, everyone in the world was stunned by the arrival of this information, and the scale reached the largest war that Britain had participated in except the Balkan Peninsula. Before the real fight began, 20,000 people and huge warships were lost. Such news can be imagined to shock the world. As the parties involved, the most shocked were Queen Victoria and the Clayton government. Crazy? Are they really crazy? How dare they attack us? 10 Downing Street, UK. Prime Minister Clayton overturned his desk with force, his face full of anger. Foreign Secretary Russell was also pale. They didn't expect that this matter would develop into this. Recently, various countries have been conducting naval exercises in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, especially seeing the Netherlands and the United States of America running to the Central Pacific for exercises. Obviously, they were avoiding them. Therefore, when they were still in the military exercise, Clayton asked the cabinet members whether Britain should take precautions and conduct supervision in the Pacific Ocean. However, these cabinet members were arrogant at the time and thought that these countries were avoiding Britain. Britain should not overprovoke the other party, especially the Netherlands, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela and Ecuador other than the United States of America. Even Russell insisted that such a thing would not happen. The Canadian Army only carried out a slight intensified defense state and did not make too much preparation. But now, it actually happened. In addition to secretly cursing Prime Minister Clayton's foul mouth, he was also thinking rapidly in his heart. Wait, when Clayton's storm is about to come, I think many people will encounter bad luck. Thinking of this, Russell secretly glanced at Clayton, and Clayton happened to look at him at this time, and his eyes for help shot at him. Mr. Russell, we have to go to Buckingham Palace later. That level is the disaster we are waiting for. On November 11, 1866, after the United States of America completely took over British Columbia and occupied Alberta, even in the Great Lakes region, the Lincoln government also heavily advanced and quickly occupied Toronto between Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and Lake Huron, and advanced all the way to the south of the Ottawa River. On November 13, 1866, it also began to slowly advance in the northeast. However, since it is one of the most prosperous places in Canada, the defense is very tight and the advancement speed is slow. On November 14, 1866, the Davis government of the Confederate States of the United States sent 50,000 Southern troops to southern Tennessee, and launched an attack the next day. It once attacked Nashville, the capital of Tennessee, and was eventually repelled by the Central Army led by William Sherman, the deputy commander of the Northern Federal State. Despite this, it also caused great trouble to the federal state of the United States. Obviously, the Davis government in the South saw the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. While helping Britain share the pressure of the federal state of the United States, it also allowed the South to use defense instead of attack to seize tangible benefits. Although it failed, it inspired a recently low morale of the South. However, will the Lincoln government suffer from the South's move? We strongly condemn the sneak attack by the Davis government. From this, we can see that Davis is not a leader who serves the Americans. He just wants to be a lackey of the British. The Civil War was started with the differences in the interests of the British. Most of the products grown in the southern plantations were sold to the British. Our charming southern United States has become the real backyard food planting area of the British and has become not American. We originally wanted to change everything, but things did not go as we wished. We did not expect that the Southern government would be so pro-British. Once again, I call on all those who admit that they are great Americans to stand up at this moment and condemn the Davis government for assisting the British in attacking their compatriots. Our internal struggle is a fight in our own home behind closed doors, but we should not bring in powerful enemies from outside to intervene. This is the army and should be cursed by all Americans. At the same time, I call on the Davis government to suspend its attack on the North. In fact, we are ready to negotiate with the South. Although some people are unwilling, we are indeed ready to do so. Davis government, are you ready? What a cruel statement. Haysbert Von looked at the telegram and saw that Lincoln had spoken about his appeal for peace talks with the South in his open speech on Capitol Hill. Haysbert Von said to the Privy Council, "I think the Davis government is in a dilemma now." Interior Secretary John Earl asked, "Isn't it said that most of the people in the South are English? If that's the case, the Davis government in the South shouldn't easily pay attention to Lincoln's call, right?" Haysbert Von, normal English people will naturally have no feelings towards Lincoln, but although the English in the South occupy the majority, those English people were originally dragged to North America by the British government to do hard labor to open up wasteland and expand land because of crimes and abandonment in the British Isles. In fact, they don't have a very good impression of the British Isles. It just happens that on the issue of plantation agricultural economy and industrial development economy, the development routes of the various levels of the North and the South are different, which has caused a gap. After all, those in the South are the old generation of immigrants who have obtained a lot of land and are landowners, while the North is mostly new immigrants, so they will not resist industrialization. Chapter 283 France launches a war in the Far East? 1866. Dutch Foreign Minister Haysbert Von explained to the Interior Minister General and others in the Privy Council whether the Lincoln government would send a call to the South to ease relations and prepare to start peace talks. He also explained that the Lincoln government was killing several birds with one stone. In fact, after several years of war, the agricultural plantation owners in the South are tired of the destruction caused by the war, and the economy is in ruins. Now the call of the Lincoln government is undoubtedly a solution to the unity of the South. Whether from the historical perspective of the United States uniting to resist Britain and independence, or from the practical benefits of the truce, it will undoubtedly put unprecedented pressure on the Davis government that advocates war. Not bad, Prime Minister Thorbecke praised. The Lincoln government is not only looking at easing the South and fully responding to the North, he has a deeper idea. Seeing that many people looked over and their eyes fell on him, Thorbecke looked at William Ivey meaningfully. Seeing that his eyes were calm, it was obvious that he did not show interest in what he was going to say next, nor did he ignore it, and he was unpredictable. He secretly sighed that the ideas of His Majesty William IV were becoming more and more elusive. Obviously, his methods of managing the country and controlling his subordinates were more sophisticated. Putting this idea behind him, he said, in fact, secondly, the Lincoln government has found a just reason for attacking the South in the future, similar to the purge of the Emperor's side, and only troubled the Davis government. Obviously, the Davis government was separated from the people in the South and treated differently. Where there are people, there are interests, and the interests are not the same. Therefore, although it is not obvious at present, with time, this interest dispute will be revealed. At that time, maybe there will be a choice. The Southerners will face the sugar-coated cannons of the North, and their dissatisfaction with the Davis government will deepen, and eventually internal fighting will break out, and even lead the North of the Lincoln government to intervene. This is Lincoln's long-term goal. With Thorbecke's analysis, everyone nodded in agreement, and William IV also praised Thorbecke's analysis. This is one of the means used by the United States to create unrest in various countries. I didn't expect the Lincoln government to start using it at this time. The second one is like this. What about the third one? Everyone, including William IV, was somewhat interested. Third, I actually think that the Lincoln government launched a war against Britain this time. There must be a reason for it to happen so suddenly. Isn't this nonsense? Nothing in this world happens without a reason. But no one dared to say this. Thorbecke obviously understood this. In fact, I think that the Lincoln government is attacking Britain in order to gain conditions for negotiations with Britain, and finally found that the Lincoln government obviously realized that only after making Britain feel the pain will it stop supporting the Confederacy and sit down to negotiate with the Lincoln government to resolve the Confederacy issue. What the Prime Minister means is that the Lincoln government is prepared to use war to promote peace. Now occupying British Columbia and Alberta, etc., is just to provide the most powerful bargaining chip for future negotiations with Britain. The speaker was the Dutch Finance Minister Jan van Capello. Thorbecke smiled at his god of wealth and said, "That's basically what I mean." Dutch Justice Minister Ross frowned and said, "In this case, the Lincoln government may be able to use a multi-pronged approach to the Confederacy in the future negotiations, which is likely to reduce the development space of the South. This is somewhat inconsistent with the North American policy we designated before. After all, in fact, on the issue of North America, except for the difference in friendly attitude with the United States, our concerns are similar to those of the United Kingdom. We don't want to see an overly powerful United States, and we don't want to see a unified United States that integrates the North and the South. This is very important for the Netherlands to occupy a dominant position in the future cooperation with the United States. After all, in terms of size and population base, the Netherlands is currently unable to match the other party, so we need to prepare for this and be vigilant against the Netherlands' decline in status after the other party becomes stronger in the future. There are only about 10 million white people in the Netherlands, less than 1/3 of the 32 million people in the United States after integration. Unless 20 million African natives and East Indian natives are added, there will be a comparison. The use of these 20 million people of color is the biggest problem for the Dutch government at present, and it is also the reason why the Dutch government has been holding frequent meetings of the Privy Council and the Thorbecke cabinet recently. Because William IV, the leader of all this, requires that the case be officially finalized before the end of this year. William IV saw that the topic was getting started. He said, in fact, the Lincoln government was so hasty to attack the British overseas territory of Canada. In addition to providing strong conditions for negotiations with Britain and gaining an advantage in future negotiations on the status of the South, there are other reasons. Everyone, including Thorbecke, looked over. I recently looked through the development history of various countries in Europe and America, and I found that some countries are rapidly entering a high-speed stage, some countries are maintaining the same, and some countries are going into regression. With the reform of Alexander II, the agricultural economy of the Russian Empire has entered the early stages of industrialization, although not completely, and the economy has developed rapidly. The scale is already comparable to that of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, ranking 7th after Britain, France, the Kingdom of Prussia, and the United States of America. We in the Netherlands are in 8th place. Britain's several years of war have made the domestic arms business booming, but the industrial economy has shrunk, so in the past 4 years, it has only grown slowly. The Kingdom of Prussia developed at the second fastest speed in Europe after the Netherlands. Their wars were short but achieved results quickly. The damage to the economy was minimal and could be ignored. They even annexed various countries, making Prussia's economy, which originally ranked behind Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, the United States, and Tsarist Russia, now almost unified the territory of the German Confederation except Austria. The rapid growth of population and territory has made their economic scale rank third, surpassing Austria-Hungary, the American Federation, and the Tsarist Russian Empire in one fell swoop, and almost matching the French Empire. This made the surrounding countries feel sudden pressure, whether it was economic or military. The reindustrialization of France also made the economy advance at a moderate speed, but the pressure from Prussia has troubled Napoleon III recently. The economic development scale of the United States of America has not grown in recent years, but has shrunk. Obviously, the economic development driven by the industrial self-sufficiency movement triggered by the war that just started in 1861 reached its peak in 1864 and began to decline, which put Lincoln under great pressure. Therefore, in order to improve the economic development difficulties, this corresponding provocative war was really a last resort. On November 20, 1866, when all countries focused on North America and were ready to watch Britain and the United States of America start a fight, France crossed the border to the west of South Vietnam and launched a small-scale war in Cambodia, in the east of the Kingdom of Siam. It happened to be discovered by Dutch reporters and reported immediately. The world paid attention to it, and the Far East fell into the vision of European and American countries. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284, The French Far East Offensive was blocked. 1866, the war in the Far East had been going on for 4 days. While the world was focusing on the Anglo-American War in North America, it also turned its attention to the Far East-South Asia Peninsula. Originally, many people thought that it would not be difficult for France to take over the Cambodian region of the Kingdom of Siam, which was not a strong country in East-South Asia, while Britain was focusing on North America and the Balkans. However, everyone was wrong. Napoleon III suffered a Waterloo. It turned out that when the war started, the Kingdom of Siam did not react. The 10,000 French Imperial Army, along with a small naval fleet consisting of 10 sailing battleships, went upstream along the Mekong River from Long Xuyen City in South Vietnam and attacked Phnom Penh, the capital of southeastern Cambodia. Although the local soldiers resisted, they were finally occupied by the suddenly emerging French army. The French army, which had tasted the sweetness, turned south and occupied the two cities of Tak Mao and Ta Keo. These three major cities in southeastern Cambodia were like this, and France only paid less than 300 people. As for Cambodia, despite paying more than 3,000 lives, it was not able to hold on in the end. When Ta Keo was occupied, King Rama IV of the Kingdom of Siam and his government had already reacted. They first sent envoys to communicate with France at the location of the Governor-General's office in South Vietnam. The latter naturally found an excuse to shirk that it was because of some reason in Cambodia that caused France to invade. Even the Governor-General's office in South Vietnam in France hinted that the Kingdom of Siam must give up Cambodia to the French Empire, so as to calm down the anger of Napoleon III and not to launch a war outside Cambodia. When the envoy returned to Bangkok and reported to Rama IV was furious, but in the face of the powerful French Empire, he immediately forced himself to calm down. Since he came to power and inherited the position of king, he deeply understood the power of the West and how terrible the military power of Western European countries in this world was. Therefore, he sent his children to various European countries to learn Western culture and to communicate with the royal families of various countries. He originally thought that this would allow the Kingdom of Siam to survive, but it seems that he was wishful thinking. Britain expanded in Western Burma, occupied Lower Burma and then advanced to Upper Burma. After France in the east occupied South Vietnam. He originally thought that it would develop in the north, but he did not expect that the Kingdom of Siam would be given priority in the west. He understood that the French Empire was obviously afraid that if it developed in North Vietnam, it would anger the big country to the north of North Vietnam. Therefore, it was obvious that it would take the soft persimmon first, that is, the Kingdom of Siam, which was easier to bully. Rama IV figured this out, and his mood was not good. So in addition to convening the National Conference of the Kingdom of Siam, after no results were obtained, he called his Crown Prince Chulalongkorn and his think tank and lover Anna with great concern. Chulalongkorn was also very worried about the French invasion. He had studied in the West for many years and deeply understood what the French invasion meant. He and Anna looked at each other and saw that the other was a little panic. But compared to Chulalongkorn, the mature Anna was better. Anna said, "Your Majesty, this time France launched the invasion purely because it saw that the European powers were constantly at war in Europe and North America, while France itself was on the outside. However, there is no morality in this. In fact, the West also needs a period of justice to justify launching a war. The Kingdom of Siam has been friendly with the West in recent years, and its relations with Western countries have become increasingly close. France cannot easily change this. I think it is crucial to send a large army to the east to stop the other side, and then convey the illegal behavior of France's invasion to the embassies of European countries in Bangkok, support and recognize the interests of various countries in the Kingdom of Siam, and ask all countries to support the position of the Kingdom of Siam in the face of the French invasion." Chulalongkorn also said, "Yes, Father, I think Miss Anna is right. There are many countries in the West that oppose the French Empire. If we can resist the French Empire, then the West will be concerned that their interests in the Far East will be destroyed by France, and they will not let France succeed easily. Not to mention other countries, Britain, Prussia and other countries will stop it, and our good neighbor the Netherlands will do the same." Anna nodded, "The most important thing is to resist the French invasion." In the end, all three of them thought that resisting the French invasion was the most important. Rama IV finally agreed, and sent the extremely enthusiastic Chulalongkorn as the highest military commander of the Eastern Anti-French Army to represent him in the Cambodian region to command the anti-French war. Chulalongkorn's status was special, and the Crown Prince had arrived at the front line. The whole Cambodian people were inexplicably excited, and now almost everyone began to cooperate in the anti-French war. In recent years, the Kingdom of Siam has imported a variety of weapons from various European countries. Most of them were purchased in order to make friends with European countries. There were even many French weapons. Napoleon III was forced to sell many of the army weapons currently used in his country to the Kingdom of Siam in order to show the strength of France. The same is true for Britain. Therefore, the weapons of the Kingdom of Siam's army are actually not inferior to those of the French army. Originally caught off guard, under the role of defending the country and the Crown Prince's personal presence at the front line, France could move freely on the Mekong River except for its navy, but its army was blocked from advancing. Even on the banks of the Mekong River, artillery batteries appeared from time to bombard the Mekong River with French navy. Until December, this small fleet of 10 warships was sunk by 2 ships. The 10,000 invading army was killed by the Kingdom of Siam in these 10 days. The Kingdom of Siam formed a regular army of 30,000 people and a ragtag army of 20,000 civilians in Cambodia. More than 50,000 people carried out anti-French actions, and even the oppressed French army was difficult to advance outside Phnom Penh. So France hurriedly sent another 10,000 people from the Far East headquarters of South Vietnam in the east to join. The remaining 10,000 people were too thin, so they hurriedly sent a signal for help to Paris. At this time, European countries began to condemn the actions of the French Empire. France was asked to negotiate with the Kingdom of Siam to resolve the dispute and not to undermine the interests of various countries in the Kingdom of Siam. Even Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom responded to Rama IV's letter for help, saying that she would put pressure on France. Sure enough, she sent a telegram to Napoleon III the next day, asking France to stop attacking Cambodia. William IV of the Netherlands said that he did not want France to undermine the security of the Netherlands' second largest trading partner in the Far East. William IV also said that he would continue to fulfill the arms contract between the Kingdom of Siam and the Netherlands, and would provide more than 20,000 rifles to the Kingdom of Siam in the next week. He said that this was a previously signed arms contract and was not within the current situation. Although this made Paris somewhat unhappy, it showed that the Netherlands would support the Kingdom of Siam to safeguard the interests of the Netherlands in the Kingdom of Siam. Chapter 285 The Chain Reaction Caused by the Russian Empire's Invasion of the Caucasus. To make matters worse, the United States attacked Canada in North America, and the Lincoln government appeased the Confederate States of America in the South, causing the Davis government to begin to face the dissatisfaction of the people in its jurisdiction who were against a long war. The Confederate States of America chose to stay put after the counterattack in the Middle Tennessee failed. This made British Prime Minister Clayton very angry. In another half a month, Britain will launch a formal prime ministerial election. Now the public dissatisfaction with the Whig Party is intensifying, and the Tories are also fueling the flames, making it seem that everything is very bad for the Whig cabinet. What's more hateful is that Napoleon III of France chose to attack the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East at this time, and Queen Victoria has asked the cabinet government to express dissatisfaction with France. However, 2 telegrams have been sent, and Napoleon III has prevaricated for various reasons, which made the Clayton cabinet government very passive. Napoleon III obviously chose to ignore Britain. In the Balkan Peninsula, the negotiations between Britain and Russia failed again and again because the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire were unwilling to reconcile easily. It was a real headache to think about this. These things have invisibly tied up most of the energy of the British cabinet. Just as he was about to rush to Buckingham Palace to report the latest situation to the Queen, he suddenly received a piece of news that caught him off guard. The report had to be rewritten, and an emergency cabinet meeting was held. It turned out that when the Russian Empire was negotiating with Britain for a ceasefire in the Balkan Peninsula, it actually advanced from the Crimean Peninsula and the Caucasus region to the south in the eastern Black Sea and entered the Ottoman Empire's territories of Georgia and Azerbaijan. Although the Ottoman Empire was on guard against the Russian Empire, it mainly focused on the Balkan Peninsula. Moreover, the Russian Empire was negotiating with Britain. The top leaders in Constantinople were paralyzed by the Russian Empire's negotiating moves. Unexpectedly, the Russian Empire suddenly launched a surprise attack in the Caucasus region. Even the 50,000 Ottoman Empire garrisons there were caught off guard in an instant. The Russian Empire easily took over northern Georgia and northern Azerbaijan. After 20,000 casualties, the 50,000 Ottoman troops had no choice but to evacuate from the northern city of Welchik. To the west, 30,000 Ottoman soldiers evacuated to the city of Sukhumi on the edge of the Black Sea. The Armenian garrison in the south had 20,000 troops rushing north to the capital Tbilisi, and another 10,000 troops went north from the southern city of Kankand, which was guarding against the Persian Empire, to the city of Baku in the west of the Caspian Sea. So there were only 10,000 people left in Hankand. If the Persian Empire provoked Hankand at this time, the pressure on the Ottoman Empire would be really great. The dilemma of the Ottoman Empire made Britain, which was just about to get out of the Balkan Peninsula, find helplessly that it was dragged back again. This was the first time that Clayton served as British Prime Minister, so he was very unfamiliar with foreign methods. Faced with the unprecedented major changes facing Britain in a century, he, a rookie, was instantly under infinite pressure. Queen Victoria could not sit still in Buckingham Palace at this time. So she came out to command in person. On November 25, 1866, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom sent Crown Prince Edward to visit St. Petersburg to hold talks with Crown Prince Nicholasevich and pay a courtesy visit to Alexander II. During the visit, although Alexander II was unwilling to talk to Crown Prince Edward about the Caucasus, the other party made it clear that Queen Victoria had warned that if the Russian Empire continued to launch a southward invasion of the Caucasus, Britain would choose to shrink on other fronts to fully deal with the southward invasion of the Russian Empire. Many people analyzed that it was obvious that after the British saw that the Russian Empire had taken Romania in the Balkan Peninsula, they also took nearly half of the territory of the Ottoman Empire in northern Georgia and northern Azerbaijan. If Britain continued to let the Russian Empire go on like this, it would not be long before the Russian Empire's army would appear in the Mediterranean, where Britain currently had an advantage. In the Caucasus, as long as the Georgia and Azerbaijan regions were taken, the Russian Empire could border the Persian Empire. At that time, if the two countries united, the Ottoman Empire would face the dilemma of comprehensive pressure from the east. Even if the Russian Empire had a good relationship with the Persian Empire, it might be able to use the Persian Empire to get an outlet in the Indian Ocean, which would be very dangerous for Britain. Therefore, Britain's sense of crisis made Queen Victoria stand up and strongly resist the invasion of Britain and Russia. The Claxton government, which originally wanted to stop Napoleon II from invading the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East, was delayed by the Russian Empire's invasion of the Caucasus in the south. Napoleon III saw the opportunity and dispatched 50,000 troops from France again, crossing the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, and arrived in South Vietnam in early December. However, the Kingdom of Siam seemed to have trained a new army at this time. When these French reinforcements arrived, They found that there were less than 10,000 troops left in the Far East of 30,000 troops. In other words, in less than a month, France lost more than 20,000 people in the Far East. These 50,000 people just replaced them, and there were only 30,000 more troops than before. This made Napoleon II's Governor-General Mathis in South Vietnam very angry. So, when these 50,000 new troops landed at Yonglong Port at the mouth of the Mekong River, he couldn't wait to dispatch troops. With the cooperation of 20,000 army and navy, they advanced to the Sea of Cambodia. The navy of the French Empire blocked the entire Cambodian coast and bombarded Kampot Port, Sihanouk Port and Koh Kong Port from east to west, but strangely, France did not harass the Bangkok area west of Cambodia. Under the bombardment of Cambodian ports, Kampot was soon occupied by 20,000 French troops. The news soon spread back to Paris, and Napoleon III was relieved. After that, the port of Sihanoukville was also taken, and the entire southeast was taken by France. However, in Koh Kong Port, there was indeed strong resistance, and France encountered unprecedented obstacles. So France began to fall into a long war with the Kingdom of Siam in Cambodia for several years. For William IV, the global focus was originally only on the confrontation between Britain and the United States in North America, and the game of powers in South America. Now, with the French invasion war of the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East and the war of the Russian Empire's invasion of the Ottoman Empire in the South, the negotiations on the Balkan Peninsula can be suspended. In addition, the full-scale war between Britain and the United States in North America, coupled with the dangerous move of the small country of Paraguay in South America to provoke the big country, will produce a regional chain reaction. These, no matter what the outcome, are bound to change the global pattern. The major powers and small countries in Europe and America had their own calculations. Britain and France, both major Western European countries, had completely different attitudes towards the invasion of the Russian Empire in the Balkan Peninsula and the Caucasus. Therefore, France was reserved, which made Britain very wary and dissatisfied. Prussia was licking its wounds from unifying the German Confederation, and slowly integrated the national strength of these small countries for its own use. Seeing other countries conquering cities all over the world, Prime Minister Bismarck and William I were also ambitious, but they were waiting for the right opportunity. Chapter 286 North American Reconciliation 1866, the United States of America and the British Army launched a land war in Quebec Province in eastern Canada. Britain invested more than 50,000 people, and the United States of America also launched operations against Britain in several states in New England, successively investing 30,000 regular troops and 40,000 temporarily recruited troops. The navies of the two countries launched a small artillery attack in the Bay of Fundy at the junction of the Atlantic Ocean between the two countries. Both countries were obviously very cautious, fearing that the other side would cause heavy casualties to their own navy. However, the army was not so polite. You came and I went, and you went back and forth between the landing and anti-landing in the St. Lawrence River. Perhaps it was the army that ignited the enthusiasm of the navy. Although the two countries were still restrained in the Atlantic Ocean, under the influence of the war in the St. Lawrence River, the navies of the two countries actually went up the river, and the confrontation developed to the other four major lakes of the 5 Great Lakes in North America, except Lake Michigan, which was exclusively enjoyed by the United States of America. Both sides suffered damage. In general, the United States had the upper hands in the army, but in the navy, Britain had to say that the United States was unmatched. So when the time came to December 20th, the British Army had more than 27,000 casualties, and the United States had more than 19,000 casualties. In terms of the Navy, Britain only lost 3 Level 5 sailing battleships and 1 Level 2 sailing battleship. And most of them were sunk by artillery fire on the shore during the naval battle with the United States in Lake Ontario. The United States lost 2 Level 5 sailing battleships, 3 Level 4 sailing battleships and 1 Level 2 sailing battleship. Perhaps the damage was too large, so both countries chose to stop large-scale operations. Of course, the most important thing is that on December 20, 1866, Britain began to hold the prime ministerial election. Perhaps both countries deliberately chose to avoid this day. In short, there was no battle of more than 100 people in the next week. When the time came to December 30th, the results of the British general election came out. The Whig Party really failed. Clayton, the interim government caretaker prime minister, will expire on January 30th, and Disraeli of the Tory party will become the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on February 1st. In other words, the next month will be a transition period. According to the law, the Clayton government will complete the handover of work within the next month, and will not be allowed to introduce major changes in foreign and domestic policies. If it is really necessary, it needs the coordination of the Tory party's shadow cabinet to be passed. Because of this, the British Army in Canada is even more immobile, waiting for the new cabinet to take office before taking the next step. Of course, in real terms, Queen Victoria is the highest commander of the British military, but the Queen did not intervene. However, the United States will not easily let go of this opportunity. While stabilizing the occupied areas of British Columbia and Alberta in Western Canada to consolidate its position, it sent a large number of naval forces to the south, and actually surrounded the maritime trade channels of the Confederate States of America. The Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic side, the south, were blocked by the Confederate States of America Navy. At the same time, Lincoln personally appealed to the South to negotiate. Obviously, Lincoln wanted to take advantage of the fact that the British election had just come out and the handover had not yet taken place, and the South had lost its support, and wanted to complete the negotiations with the South in a dominant position in one step, in order to obtain the greatest benefits. The Navy of the Davis government has always been a weak point. In front of the eighth largest navy in the world, the United States, it naturally lacked the help of Britain and really became the target of the successful blockade of the United States. Even the Navy can only hide in major ports, or go up the Mississippi River and enter the inland river in order to be preserved and not be destroyed. The Davis government has sent several requests for help to Britain, but Buckingham Palace and No. 10 Downing Street just asked the Davis government to wait for the opportunity and not to rush. But the United States of America in the North would not let them wait. The Navy even bombarded major seaports. It was difficult for the South to sell its food overseas, and it was difficult for the arms supplier to continue. Therefore, after half a month, the Davis government was under increasing pressure from domestic opposition. When the Disraeli government came to power on February 1, 1867, Disraeli chose to negotiate and reconcile with the United States of America. It turned out that Disraeli's shadow cabinet had already communicated privately with Lincoln and added a secret channel outside the Clayton government. Queen Victoria also knew about this because Disraeli had reported it to the Queen. Although the Queen was dissatisfied, she had to admit that this was one of the best ways to stabilize British interests in North America, and she finally agreed. Therefore, as soon as he came to power, Disraeli changed the previous cabinet's efforts to develop relations with the Southern Confederacy and ignore the North. On February 6, after taking over, the Disraeli cabinet government directly announced that it would send a new diplomatic envoy, Washington, to negotiate. In the end, no one knew the outcome of the negotiations between the two countries, but Britain lobbied the South for the benefits of reconciliation with the North. At this time, the Davis government didn't know that the new British government must have reached some shameful agreement with Lincoln. So the Davis government chose to compromise. Finally, on January 15, 1867, the North and the South chose to hold talks in Orange City, between the northern capital Washington and the southern capital Richmond, with Lincoln and Davis attending in person. British Prime Minister Disraeli, as the first Prime Minister, first sent the new Foreign Secretary and former Prime Minister Edward Henry Stanley of the Tory cabinet government to take the lead, and then he formally attended the meeting. Also attending were Dutch Prime Minister Thorbecke, Tsarist Russian Empire Gorchakov, French Olivier, and Prussian Kingdom Bismarck as interested countries to testify at the meeting. Among them, the Tsarist Russian Empire, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the Kingdom of Prussia, as the security guarantors of the Northern American Confederation, and the United Kingdom and the French Empire, as the security guarantors of the South, all signed the guarantees of each country on this peace agreement. At the meeting, President Lincoln and President Davis signed an armistice peace agreement on behalf of the North and the South. The Southern American Confederacy recognized the status of the Northern American Confederacy and recognized that the Lincoln government's current jurisdiction was the Northern Territory. The Lincoln government also recognized the area under the jurisdiction of the Davis government as the Southern Territory. Both sides did not deny each other's international status. Many people were very surprised that the Lincoln government actually agreed to the existence of the Southern government. However, when you read on, you will find that the key point is here. According to the Armistice Agreement, the relations between the Federal States of America and the Confederate States of America were normalized, and trade was normalized. Chapter 287. The Tories come to power. 1867. There were many major events that attracted the most attention from the world. Among them, on January 8, the Dutch royal family announced that Queen Alexandra of the Netherlands was pregnant again. This made politicians and royal family members from all over the world once again send their blessings to the Dutch royal family for the new member. After that, the Netherlands held a Spring Bicycle Open, with more than 5,000 people from the Netherlands and the Far East participating in Sydney, Australia. Finally, on January 17, William IV personally went to Sydney, Australia to participate in the finals and personally handed the championship trophy to the champion. In addition, William IV also announced that a bicycle open would be held in the Far East every spring, and the autumn race would be held in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. For a time, a bicycle craze swept across the Netherlands. At the same time, bicycle manufacturers under the William Group worked overtime to popularize bicycles across the country, and used the financial subsidies of the Netherlands to reduce the purchase price of bicycles in the Netherlands. According to William IV, people should be able to afford bicycles, use bicycles, and use bicycles for transportation and transporting goods without affecting their lives. In 1866, the per capita income of the Dutch people was £100, an increase of more than 11% from £90 in the previous year. The bicycles under the William Group are sold for only £10 in the Netherlands, while they cost £20 abroad. In other words, an adult worker can buy a bicycle in the Netherlands with a monthly income. With a hype, this is already a tool comparable to a horse, and it does not need to be raised. For the Dutch people, it is still a symbol of face. If you don't have a bicycle at home, you are embarrassed to go out. So in just a few years, bicycles have become very popular in the Netherlands. Now, with the policy of roads becoming supporting infrastructure for bicycles, bicycles have become one of the necessary tools for travel in the Netherlands. The Dutch cabinet government even passed a proposal in the Dutch House of Representatives and the Senate, which is to establish a new cabinet position of the Dutch Minister of Transport to specifically manage transportation matters in the Netherlands. When the two parliaments passed it, William IV also signed his name. As the proposal was quickly passed and the appointment was made soon, the transportation development of the Netherlands entered a new fast channel. Unlike the previous transportation announcements of only trains, horse-drawn carriages, and pedestrian walkways, this time the Netherlands has added bicycle repair lanes throughout the country and officially named them highways. This puzzled many parts of the world, but after the William Group's confidence bicycles, new structures such as the front basket and rear seats that can carry goods appeared and applied for patents around the world. Many parts of the world began to realize that the Netherlands actually planned to use this pedal bicycle to complete things that used to require carriages and horse tools. Therefore, the governments of Europe and the United States also began to judge in their respective countries whether to learn from the bicycle trend in the Netherlands and reform the national transportation policy. However, many small countries were discouraged when they thought of buying bicycles from the Netherlands. Even in industrial powers such as Britain, Disraeli's cabinet was blocked by the Whig Party, which is now the opposition party. The reason is that it is a major investment. If it is to be implemented, it will cost hundreds of millions of pounds. British MPs do not seem to be willing to pass a large amount of money for road construction. After all, these will be taxed domestically. In this way, the benefit is to the lower class of society, but the majority of the upper class who pay taxes, so this is damaging their interests. This naturally makes the Whig Party oppose it. Even most Tory MPs disagree. Therefore, Disraeli gave up before he even started the discussion. Britain is like this, and even France is similar. The Russian Empire cannot keep up with the economy, so it is naturally impossible to implement it. However, Prussia seems to be advancing under the joint efforts of Bismarck and William I. However, when William IV learned about Prussia's advancement policy, he had to sigh that it was really talented. It turned out that in the Kingdom of Prussia, each region actually implemented a policy of self-promotion. Prime Minister Bismarck actually adopted the policy of implementing the easy first and then the difficult, allowing the principalities that wanted to use bicycles as a means of transportation to make their own choices, which reduced the intensity of opposition, and then slowly tried to do it. This also made William IV look at him with new eyes, worthy of being an old fox. Unlike Olivier and Disraeli, who did not know how to be tactful. However, what surprised William IV was that the Lincoln government also announced that the United States of America would follow the policy of the Netherlands, which made William IV feel as uncomfortable as if he had just swallowed a fly. Alice, the United States of America is really a future competitor for the interests of the Netherlands, and it can't be thrown away. On February 15, 1867, the American Civil War in North America was officially announced to the outside world. However, the price was that the United States was divided into two from then on. The United States of America controlled the North and occupied about 2/3 of the original territory of the United States. The Southern Confederacy of America led by Davis was the remaining 1/3. The two countries formally demarcated the border. It seems that influenced by both sides, Britain and the United States of America officially announced on February 25, 1867 that the armistice agreement between the two countries in North America had been completed. The United States of America will withdraw from all the Ontario territories occupied by the United States of America in the East. As compensation, Britain is willing to sell British Columbia to the United States of America for £5 million after the United States of America agrees to withdraw from Alberta. Since then, the United States of America has officially blocked Britain's outlet to the sea in Western Canada. In other words, in the North Pacific, Britain will have no foothold in the East-North Pacific from now on. This is very beneficial to the United States of America's subsequent development in the West, and it is also very important to reduce British harassment. Britain has gained the opportunity to get out of North America and can launch a new strategic deployment in the Far East and Europe to deal with France and the Russian Empire. It is not a pity to sell British Columbia. Of course, Disraeli's new government also complies with public opinion to reduce the Northern War, reduce the instability of Britain's rear area backed by Canada, and get a respite to fully meet the challenges of Europe, which can be said to be won in one fell swoop. Therefore, the public opinion of the Tory party in the country has been rising steadily. In addition, the fact that the Crown Prince Edward has attended many occasions with Disraeli has made the entire Tory cabinet government and the British royal family seem to have added some easing, breaking the rumors that the royal family and the Tory party have been at odds for nearly 28 years since Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1839. Many people speculate that the British royal family is rebalancing the situation in which the Whig party has the upper hand because of the support of the royal family. The Crown Prince obviously favors the position of the Tory party, which makes Queen Victoria's attitude towards the Whig party and the Tory party no longer clear. Because of this, Disraeli chose to ease relations on the issue of the Tsarist Russian Empire. Alexander I also seemed to give Disraeli enough face. After taking over northern Georgia and northern Azerbaijan in the Caucasus, he was willing to negotiate with Britain in Belgium again. So Disraeli of Britain pressured the Ottoman Empire to participate, and finally the three parties seemed to have news that they would soon reach an agreement. The Tories and Whigs had different views on Europe and different friendships with different countries. In addition to being friendly with the United States and the Russian Empire, the Tories had the strongest relationship with Portugal. Chapter 288 Sanctions on the French Empire. In the Dutch-Portuguese-African War, the British opposition Tory party supported Portugal, while the ruling Whig party supported the Netherlands. Therefore, the Tory party coming to power will not be good news for the Netherlands. The relationship between the Tory party and the Netherlands will not be as warm as that of the Whig party. Therefore, the Kingdom of the Netherlands will most likely not continue the previous situation of the Whig party's concessions during the Tory party's cabinet government. Many people believe that the Netherlands will be quite cautious in the next period of time to avoid becoming an opponent of the Tory government and an object of prestige. Of course, France is worse than the Netherlands. The latter is at least Germanic, but France is even more of a thorn in the eyes of the Tories. Therefore, when the North American Armistice Agreement was reached, the new British Prime Minister couldn't wait to intervene in the Far East affairs. The Far East situation, with a change of the British cabinet, forced Napoleon III to stop and wait and see. Perhaps even Napoleon III understood that the Tory party, the pioneer of the anti-French party, is likely to fight with France and the world, and France may pay the price. Sure enough, the new British Prime Minister Disraeli made a move. On February 29, 1867, Sir Lawrence, the Governor-General of the British colony of India, first accepted the invitation of the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Siam to visit the Kingdom of Siam. The British Governor-General in India later stated that Britain was unwavering in its respect for the territory of the Kingdom of Siam and would not invade, let alone allow other countries to invade. Thus, the red line was drawn, giving Britain an excuse to intervene in the struggle between the Kingdom of Siam and France in the Far East. So on March 10, 1867, the British Indian Ocean Combined Fleet began to patrol outside the Gulf of Bangkok. Even on the 13th, the fleet began to gradually advance to the coast of Cambodia in the east, and then the French fleet that blocked the Cambodian coast withdrew eastward. Finally, on March 16, 1867, the French naval fleet withdrew from the Cambodian waters. Britain shook its prestige in the Far East, but the stepping stone was the French Empire. France's retreat made Napoleon III and the French government the object of ridicule at home and abroad. This made Napoleon III very angry, so he made a decision in a fit of anger. That was to increase troops in the Far East. At the same time, the local navy also sent a fleet to reinforce the South Vietnamese fleet, trying to counter the British presence there. France's decision made the British government very dissatisfied. So, Britain, unwilling to be outdone, also increased its troops there. The two countries suddenly wrestled across the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East. And William IV naturally did not miss this opportunity for publicity, so a scene appeared. On March 20, 1867, the ambassador of the Kingdom of Siam's embassy in the Netherlands formally filed an appeal to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, requesting the court to judge the French Empire's invasion of the Kingdom of Siam, on the charge that France had committed a war crime, and requiring all member states of the organization to help the Kingdom of Siam stop France's criminal behavior. At the same time, all member states were requested to impose sanctions on France, as proposed in the appeal after winning the judgment. As soon as this news came out, it immediately overshadowed all the hot spots and became the focus of attention of all countries. It seems ridiculous that a small country in the Far East is accusing France, a European power, in Europe, where France is located. However, it is true. The International Court of Justice in The Hague is the third newly established international organization in the world, and it has many members. In Europe, there are Spain, Sweden, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Denmark, Belgium, Greece, the Duchy of Luxembourg and other countries. In America, there are the United States of America, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and the Kingdom of Siam in Asia. It is composed of large, medium and small countries, but the combined strength is enough to have a huge impact on the major powers. As a member, the Kingdom of Siam has the right to appeal. So on March 21, 1867, the court formally issued a subpoena to Paris, but the French Empire ignored it. Even the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs ridiculed the legitimacy of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. France is not bound by it and is not qualified to impose constraints on France. Napoleon III more comfortably called on all major powers to join the French Empire in resisting this obvious overreach of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and said that it endangered the power of the great powers. However, it seemed as if it had nothing to do with them. Britain, the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire all seemed to be silent, neither opposing nor recognizing the French call. Even the British Tory government pushed the Kingdom of Portugal to ask the International Court of Justice to withdraw more sanctions against France, including a wider range of economic and military sanctions. This made the French Empire very dissatisfied. Since France did not send anyone to participate in the trial on March 27, 1867, in the end, although countries such as Spain and Belgium chose not to support or oppose, the judges of other countries agreed with the position of the Kingdom of Siam, and almost all accepted it. On April 2, 1867, at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the Netherlands, all member states of the court officially announced the execution of the court's judgment after more than two-thirds of the judges representing various countries agreed. France was required to withdraw from Cambodia. If it refused to comply, all member states of the court would impose military and economic sanctions on the French Empire in order to safeguard the security and interests of the member states. Among them, military sanctions include the trade of weapons, accessories and complete weapons. Economic sanctions include member states suspending all import and export trade with the French Empire. This ruling is not light, and it is the first time in history that an organization has imposed such severe oppressive sanctions on a European power. This frightened the powerful leaders of the great powers such as Queen Victoria and Prime Minister Disraeli of Britain, William I and Prime Minister Bismarck of Prussia, Alexander I and Prime Minister Gorchakov of the Russian Empire, and Joseph I. Although no one thinks that this law will be truly implemented, don't forget that the unified caliber of these countries alone is enough to cause immeasurable loss of the dignity of the French Empire. It can be said that this time, France has lost both face and substance. We strongly condemn those ridiculous countries that want to impose sanctions on the French Empire. We call for not damaging bilateral relations. The national strength of the French Empire will not be easily affected. We guarantee it. At the same time, we call on other major powers to stand up together and oppose this so-called judgment and sanctions against major powers, because this is an insult to us. Yes, it is an insult to the national dignity of major powers. If you choose to watch the jokes of France now, then this joke may fall on you in the future. Napoleon III personally held a press conference at the Palace of Versailles, stating that he would not accept the judgment of the International Hague Court and would not easily withdraw from the French-occupied territory of Cambodia in the Far East. He also stated that the French Empire would not accept the judgment of such sanctions. For a time, all parts of the world seemed to predict that Europe and even the world would enter a more turbulent situation. What they are most concerned about is whether the member states of the International Court of Justice in The Hague really dare to sanction the French Empire. Aren't they afraid of being retaliated by the French Empire one by one? Chapter 289 William IV's Two-Handed Preparation. Kingdom of the Netherlands, Amsterdam, inside the Royal Palace of the Netherlands. William, Napoleon III must know about our series of sanctions against France. Will this trigger the French Empire's retaliation against us? I am worried that the southern part of the Netherlands will face turmoil due to France's dissatisfaction. Queen Alexandra's face was full of worry. Recently, the Netherlands has come to the forefront of Europe with the ruling of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Everyone knows that this time the Netherlands does not seem to be afraid of France's anger. This puzzled many people, and even Queen Alexandra was worried about it. Just now, she was waiting for William IV to come back from the weekly Privy Council meeting. In her spare time, she expressed her worries. William IV continued to tease his eldest son, Prince Albert, the future first heir to the King of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, although only over 1 year old, has already opened his face. He is very handsome. Obviously, he will be very popular among the female members of the royal families of various European countries in the future, William IV thought. Seeing that his wife was pregnant with her second child again after more than a year, his worry was evident on his face. William IV comforted her, "Don't worry, why would you go back if you have seen something I am not sure of?" The latter shook her head. Alexandra thought about it and really searched William IV's past. It really didn't happen. Even when she was a child, especially when she thought of her husband running directly to Denmark and almost snatching Anderson's teacher, she remembered it deeply, even though it was her first contact with William. Since then, Alexandra, who has been paying attention to him over the years, seems to have witnessed William IV's almost perfect growth history. Now it has brought the Netherlands to dare to resist the European hegemony-level French Empire after borrowing power, and even actively sanction the French Empire. How confident and audacious this is, which makes Alexandra very proud of her husband. In fact, William IV really started planning with Prime Minister Thorbecke's Privy Council when he was preparing to weaken the French Empire. The time started in the middle of 1866. During this period, the Dutch embassies in various countries around the world have already begun to carry out various foreshadowing actions, and finally began to take interests as the premise, and finally promoted the influence of the three major international organizations established by the Netherlands step by step. William IV even triggered the idea from the least number of members of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, taking disadvantages as advantages, and wanting to become famous in one battle, using France as an example to kill the chicken and scare the monkey. Thoroughly establish the influence of the Netherlands and establish the international status of the Netherlands. Many people may ask, with countries such as Italy, Portugal and Spain also in it, how can the Netherlands guarantee itself? When William IV faced such questions from these cabinet members in the Privy Council, he directly told them the answer. Because the Netherlands has already laid out to win over the countries in South America, and brought in the United States of America as allies, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, etc., the number of votes added up to even far exceeds half. As long as some interest exchanges are added, the dominant position of the Netherlands will naturally be established. As long as the Far East develops in the future, the international status of the Netherlands will gradually be actually deserved, and then it will be another way of operation. These first-hand preparations. Secondly, the Dutch cabinet and the Tory party have been communicating recently, which can be traced back to more than a year ago. William IV understood the historical shift between the Tory party and the Whig party, So he began to direct the Dutch cabinet to secretly contact the Tory party, and even provided a lot of black information about the Whig party to help Disraeli get elected. In the end, the two sides actually began to ease the relationship, and even helped Disraeli this time to establish a cooperative relationship between the two sides, which established the beginning of cooperation for the Anglo-Dutch cabinet relationship in the next 4 years. After the Tory party came to power, Disraeli and Thorbecke began to make the first attempt at new cooperation with the goal of France. This can be regarded as opening up another cooperation model between the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. As far as William IV knows, everything is going well at present, and he secretly said, the British side should start. On April 5, 1867, the French Empire launched an attack on Cambodia in the Far East. Compared with the previous attack, this time the attack was more fierce. On the 8th, with 30,000 strong soldiers of the French Empire, Saint-Monneram and Longfa in the northeast were quickly captured. Although Crown Prince Chulalongkorn led the soldiers of the Kingdom of Siam to resist hard, they were ultimately unable to defend the two cities. Because France actually sent French troops from Pleiku and Buen My Thuot in central Vietnam to raid from the east, the army of the Kingdom of Siam suffered heavy losses under surprise. In the end, under the leadership of Crown Prince Chulalongkorn, they retreated westward to Stung Treng City. The defeat of the Kingdom of Siam was expected by European countries. If they could defeat the French Empire, a European power, in a one-on-one battle, then they would have no need to sanction France. On April 7, 1867, major newspapers in the British Empire published a new interview with Disraeli, which reported that Disraeli talked about Britain's 3 requests to the French government to withdraw from the Kingdom of Siam, but they were all rejected by Napoleon III and the Olivers government. As one of the important partners of the Kingdom of Siam, Britain said that he fully agreed with the ruling of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. He believed that the actions of the French Empire not only violated morality, but also violated international law, and harmed Britain's economic and strategic interests in the Far East. Therefore, he said that the British Empire Cabinet Government was evaluating whether to follow the ruling of the International Court of Justice in The Hague and imposed the same sanctions on the French Empire. Britain followed the members of the International Court of Justice in The Hague to sanction the French Empire? This shocked the world. They looked in the direction of the British Isles in disbelief. You know, Britain itself is the biggest thief who invaded other countries, but now it looks like a thief crying stop thief, which is funny and ironic. It's ridiculous. However, from a strategic point of view, this is a major event that needs to be taken seriously, because it means that Britain is no longer alone, but is willing to cooperate with the members of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which is known as the Club of Small and Medium-Sized Countries. This has caused other countries to start some speculation. Seeing the potential of the organization, does Britain want to join the organization? This immediately made other powerful countries such as the Kingdom of Prussia and the Russian Empire anxious. However, the positions of the Kingdom of Prussia, the Russian Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire are vague, and they have no intention of joining. Although most countries have responded, they are not big and choose to observe. On the contrary, the Ottoman Empire is accustomed to the law of the jungle, and the French Empire seems to have caused public outrage. Thinking of the Crimean War in 1853, France was the second largest power to support them. This time, the Anglo-Austrian-Russian War in the Balkans chose not to declare war on Tsarist Russia to support them, so they were dissatisfied with France, and the balance of support naturally turned to France, which was sanctioned by the International Court of Justice in The Hague, to show their anger. The French invasion of Siam made the Ottoman Empire sympathize with it, and eventually the Ottoman Empire followed Britain and announced that it would also evaluate sanctions against France. This immediately brought tension to the Mediterranean. Chapter 290 Visit of Kings Karl XV and Christian IX. The Ottoman Empire and Britain both wanted to join the International Hague to sanction France. Sanction the French Empire? This matter has affected the calm situation in the Mediterranean. After all, Britain and the Ottoman Empire control the Suez Canal. If Britain and the Ottoman Empire impose sanctions, the French Empire is likely to face the Suez Canal to prohibit French ships from passing through, or increase the French ship fees for transit, which are all adverse effects that France needs to face. What's more, in the sanctions, the International Court of Justice in The Hague also clearly expressed its approval of the Kingdom of Siam's proposal to purchase European weapons to deal with France's invasion. This gave European countries a reason to sell their weapons to the Kingdom of Siam. As a result, The member states of the organization provided military equipment and supplies. Among them, due to geographical reasons, Spain, which occupies the Dutch East Indies, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the Far East and occupies the Philippine Islands. Although pro-French, it pretended to abstain from voting in the sanctions vote before, but Spain is not ambiguous about making money from arms sales, sold the most weapons among the members of the organization. Britain, which is not a member of the International Court of Justice, owns the Malayan Islands and Lower Burma in the west around the Kingdom of Siam. In just April, the three countries signed a military sales agreement with the Kingdom of Siam for more than £900,000, of which the Netherlands sold army weapons and firearms and strategic food materials, and the weapons shipped from Jakarta reached £500,000. Britain also sold £250,000 to the Kingdom of Siam from India and Malacca, mainly naval battleships, and Spain sold £150,000 of firearms. You know, these are ready-made weapons and materials, and the Kingdom of Siam reached these agreements with various countries in just 1 month, allowing these countries' military sales to reach record revenues this year. Many people speculate that the competition for the position of the leading power in military sales, especially the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, is likely to enter a transposition dispute. In short, the Netherlands, just after the first quarter, finally won another large arms order after the suspension of the Civil War in North America. This allows the Far East's arms business industry chain to continue to operate, and hundreds of thousands of jobs in the Netherlands can continue. On April 6, 1867, Danish King Christian IX and Swedish King Charles XV jointly visited Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and William IV received the two Dutch allies at the same time. Christian IX was worthy of being a father-in-law. From the beginning, he was wary of the French sanctions that might be pushed by the powerful countries against the Netherlands, and reminded William IV to be careful to deal with the suppression of the major powers. This made William IV sigh that they were indeed worthy of being father and daughter, and they thought the same thing as Queen Alexandra. William IV said proudly, Napoleon III of the French Empire would never have thought that the small and medium-sized countries in Europe would reach an unprecedented consensus and choose to be vigilant against the French Empire. Now all the major powers should have realized that this is not just the Netherlands. This is a desperate counterattack reminder from small countries to big countries, implying that small countries will not sit idly by and watch the situation of the weak being eaten by the strong like the neighboring small countries around the French Empire. It reminds the major powers that in order to protect themselves from the occupation of their neighbors, small countries will inevitably become the next target, so they will unite and fight back. Although the Kingdom of Siam is far away from the European continent, it does not prevent various countries from protecting this new member state that has joined the International Court of Justice in The Hague. After all, the Kingdom of Siam is also very enthusiastic about Europe. France has sent ambassadors to almost all European countries and integrated into Europe. Therefore, morally and strategically, France faces condemnation from all countries. William IV said this and said to the two, everyone knows that the Russian Empire is now waging war in the Balkan Peninsula and around the Black Sea, which has made all countries vigilant. Now France is also like this, which makes small and medium-sized countries even more panicked. In addition, Britain's actions in North America and the Prussian Empire's previous unification of the German Confederation, whether by coercion or temptation, are enough to make other countries of our country face a strategic crisis. Carl XV asked, so when you proposed the establishment of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, from the beginning, you were fighting to establish an international organization established to check and balance the great powers. Hearing this, Christian IX also looked at his son-in-law William IV. If this is the case, his son-in-law is far-sighted. William IV did not deny it, saying, yes, your Majesty should know that, although it is unpleasant to say, we have to admit the fact that we alone cannot rival any of these great powers. The population gap is a threshold that is difficult to cross, not to mention the economic gap. Carl XV's eyes flickered, and he looked at William IV with a profound look. Why doesn't your Majesty William IV continue to form an alliance with the Russian Empire to check and balance other great powers? Christian IX also looked at the Netherlands in confusion. In the past 10 years, the Netherlands has been forming alliances among the great powers, and has been better off with each country, allowing the Netherlands to flutter its sleeves. Its economic and military strategies have developed rapidly, and it has almost reached the top of the medium-sized powers. Its status is now second only to Britain, the French Empire, the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and is about the same as Spain. This is a model and envy of other small and medium-sized countries. Therefore, as a beneficiary, I don't understand why William IV seems to have made an abnormal diplomatic move and seems unwilling to continue his previous position. Puzzled, very puzzled. William IV smiled bitterly and said, "The Netherlands has a strategic partnership with these great powers. The relationship between the Russian Empire and the Netherlands is calculated by centuries. In the history of war between Sweden and the Russian Empire, the Netherlands has almost always acted as a mediator." Karl XV nodded in agreement. Indeed, the Netherlands is the century-old mediator between Sweden and Russia. The special strategic partnership between the Netherlands and the Russian Empire for more than 200 years is not as good as the Kemal alliance between Sweden and Denmark. To this day, the Russian Empire is still an important strategic partner of the Netherlands. I don't want to lie to you. The Russian Empire is in the strategic core of the Netherlands and is equally important as the allies of the two countries. He said, "We have no major disputes with the Russian Empire. We have common basic interests in the balance of interests in the strategic situation in Europe and Asia." The frankness of William IV made Karl XV and the others nod their heads. This is indeed a symbol of natural allies. It is no wonder that the friendship between the two countries has remained unchanged for hundreds of years, which makes them understand. As for the vigilance of the major powers against the Netherlands, William IV said this and looked at the two people. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 Nordic Core Alliance. Seeing this, William IV dragged back to the previous topic and said helplessly, "The Netherlands has reached a bottleneck in its development. Just as many institutions in the current international community have reported, the Netherlands is now developing rapidly in terms of both economic and military strength, and in terms of scale, it has almost reached the level of the six major powers. In this case, if the Netherlands chooses to pretend to be a smaller medium-sized country, I think not only the Dutch will not agree, because this is just hiding the honor, but even the big countries will not let the Netherlands continue to make a fortune in silence. After all, this is a huge threat." Karl XV and Christian IX agreed with what they said. "You know, in the past few years, the economic development of the Netherlands has made them jealous. Major domestic capitals are urging the two governments to speed up learning from the Netherlands in order to keep up with the pace of the Netherlands' development, especially Sweden. Since Oscar I, he has focused on developing industry. Since Karl XV, who inherited the kingdom in 1859, he has begun to move closer to the industrial and economic powers in Western Europe. In fact, the reason why Karl XV brought Sweden to form an alliance with William IV's Kingdom of the Netherlands was because William IV promised to help Sweden implement the long-cherished wish of promoting industrialization and helping two generations of kings, so Karl XV joined the circle of allies of the Netherlands. Later, Sweden received help from the Netherlands, and its domestic industry entered the fast lane of development, which made Karl XV love William IV very much. If it weren't for the fact that his only princess, Princess Louisa, was too young, born in 1851 and now only 16 years old, and William IV was too immature when he married Alexandra, he would not mind the marriage between the two countries. Thinking of this, he looked at Christian IX next to him, and couldn't help but feel envious, lamenting that the other party had many bloodlines. Christian IX also agreed with what William IV said. When Prussia and Austria and other German confederations invaded Schleswig and Holstein, Denmark encountered difficulties. That helpless dilemma, how powerless it was, this feeling made Christian IX feel terrible when he thought about it. Therefore, when William IV mentioned it, he felt the deepest. So he couldn't help but say, yes, the Netherlands needs to plan more about this. Big countries also have their own national interests. We, small and medium-sized countries, are just a dish for others. If you like it, you can eat it. If you don't like it, it's just a gift for others to taste. I hate this feeling. Therefore, William, your approach is right. We should indeed have a platform that belongs to us, so that the big countries will be afraid and dare not attack us at will. William IV saw that his father-in-law was assisting him, and he could understand it. The German Confederation seized Schleswig and Holstein, which originally belonged to Denmark, and Denmark needed a long time to heal its wounds. However, the attitude of Denmark and Sweden, obviously, both countries have more thoughts than before under the demonstration of the Netherlands. William IV's heart moved. If he could make good use of the changes in the minds of the two, the Netherlands could plan more benefits for this. So he said, "Your Majesties, I think it would be a sin to keep the pearl locked up in a treasure box at home forever, because it would not reflect its value." Christian IX and Karl XV looked at William IV and waited for the next words. They were all kings in charge of a country, so they naturally understood that William IV had something else in mind. "Then I'll put it bluntly. If the two countries hide in Northern Europe forever, it will be difficult for the two countries to get opportunities for rapid development. Look at the Netherlands, and then look at Portugal. I think you both have seen that both countries are small countries with small populations, but their overseas colonies and economic development are good." William IV looked at Christian IX. Denmark's navy is among the top 10 in the world. Even compared with the current Portugal and Italy, it is not much different. With such a navy, supporting them is to protect the country. In fact, we should do our best to gain more benefits for Denmark. He looked at Karl XV again and said, "The Swedish army is a famous iron army in Europe. Back then, under the leadership of His Majesty John Karlsson, the countries defeated the northern French army ruled by Napoleon I, which shocked the world. I won't say much about this. Even the Russian Empire was wary of your country and dared not act rashly. Such a powerful army is almost at the level of a great power. Denmark and Sweden have their own strengths and weaknesses, which complement each other. If they can cooperate and plan, wouldn't this be something that can change the European landscape?" The two were moved by what William IV said. Indeed, the Swedish army is well known in Europe. Even if Prussia had the same scale, it would have to admire it, and the Russian Empire would not object. Denmark's navy is also one of the strongest in the North Atlantic. If the two countries were one country, the great powers such as Britain would have been worried. This is something everyone knows, but now that King William IV of the Netherlands has said it, it makes the two of them suddenly see the blue sky, and the sense of pride suddenly surges, and the calculations in their hearts begin to run rapidly. Seeing that the two were interested, William IV said, "The Netherlands is willing to provide such a platform for Sweden and Denmark to show their strengths." Karl XV's face was shocked, and he looked at William IV's face in disbelief. Christian IX's eyes also jumped, and his ambition was fully revealed. These two people usually seem to have no idea of dominating Europe, but William IV never believed that these two people had no ambition at all, but were just restricted by conditions. The rise of the Netherlands gave the two men a glimmer of hope, but William IV's words now opened Pandora's box, allowing the two men's ambitions to take root and grow. Even without paying attention, the two men came up with a bold idea, that is, to follow the Netherlands closely. If the Netherlands eats meat, they should also drink soup. Of course, if they face an irresistible war between great powers, they will not withdraw and stand idly by when the Netherlands is unable to resist. Of course, it goes without saying that William IV also wants and can imagine this. This is both an international reality and a code of conduct for European countries. Seeing the two men, William IV knew that it was time. So in the expectant eyes of the two men, William IV said, "I am going to invite your two countries to become observers of the South American Union. When the time is right, you can further become a member state." Karl XV and Christian IX were shocked again. Karl XV asked with burning eyes, "Will this be a bit abrupt? After all, we are different from the Netherlands. We have no territory there." Christian IX also nodded, with a pity on his face. William IV smiled mysteriously and said, "Not now, but it doesn't mean there won't be in the future." So under the expectation of the two, William IV finally expressed his thoughts. After listening to them, the two were immediately convinced. Everything in Europe is based on strength. If you can bring me benefits, what can I do if I temporarily take you as the leader? After that, William IV began to ask the two countries to cooperate with the foreign policy of the Netherlands, but the two readily agreed. There are gains and losses. This is the political reality. Under the promotion of William IV, the young Dutch king, the three countries secretly signed the Nordic Alliance. Sweden and Denmark officially established the Nordic Core Alliance with the Netherlands. There are only 3 member states, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. Even the Netherlands and Sweden each bought the east and west sides of Greenland, a deserted island of ice and land in Denmark, for £500,000, and truly became a veritable Nordic country divided in half vertically. The east was taken by Karl XV first, and the west was given to the Netherlands. Obviously, Karl XV did not want to face the United Kingdom in North America and Canada and the British mainland in the south, so he would rather take the colder east. However, this was exactly what William IV wanted. In order to make up for Denmark's contribution, William IV expressed his willingness to give Denmark an island in the Pacific Ocean to make up for the dissatisfaction of opponents in Denmark. This embarrassed Karl XV, but Christian IX was moved. As the countries surrounding the French Empire provided weapons to the Kingdom of Siam, it was even reported that the Confederate States of America and Chile in southern North America, which were not members of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, After seeing the sanctions imposed on France by The Hague, the presidents of these two countries, Davis, expressed their intention to join. For this reason, the Confederate States of America even sent a special envoy to Washington, the capital of the Confederate States of America in the North, to try to get the Lincoln government not to stop them from applying to join. For this reason, the North and the South took the opportunity to ease relations, and the peace process in North America took a big step forward. Other countries such as Peru, Chile, and Bolivia condemned and sanctioned the French Empire in European countries, and these countries began to choose to wait and see to avoid getting involved. In the past, the Confederate States of America, which was afraid of the French Empire and dared not to be tough on the French Empire because of its infiltration-style invasion of Mexico, chose the ostrich policy at that time because of its excessive hatred for the North and the wartime state, avoiding open criticism of the French Empire, and even showing goodwill in trying to win it over. But now, with the easing of tensions between the North and the South and the implicit support of the Lincoln government, the Davis government has changed its policy toward France. Davis even publicly criticized France for its similar colonial policy toward Mexico, which was wrong. The Confederate States of America was very angry, so he called on France to withdraw from North America and not to launch wars to invade anywhere in the world, including the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East, to make the world more peaceful. President Davis also reiterated that he respected the French Empire and Napoleon III. Bosch, a researcher at the International Department of the Amsterdam Institute, a private think tank in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, said that this is a major concern in the foreign policy of the two American countries in North America. The North and the South have obviously cooperated, which is an important event for America and even Europe. Unfortunately, France has become the experimental target. Obviously, this is an enemy jointly established by both sides. Obviously, on the issue of America, the French Empire and Napoleon III did not do a good job in North American diplomacy. Bosch said, "It is almost certain that the two countries will face the threat from Europe to North America and even South America together after putting aside their prejudices." The world's largest newspaper, Europe Times, interviewed Herman van Rompuy, the dean of the School of Diplomacy of Leiden University, the oldest university in the Netherlands, in 1862, and also a special commentator of the most influential Europe Times in Europe. In an interview with the European Times, Van Rompuy said that all countries have always considered their own interests. Member states of the International Court of Justice in The Hague were horrified by France's invasion of other countries. Many even feared Napoleon I's rule at the beginning of this century, so they have long been wary of France. Napoleon II's ambitions had not been exposed in the past, so countries had not said anything. But now, with Mexico in North America, the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East, and Paraguay in South America operating simultaneously, countries have begun to recall that lost memory. Therefore, the countries may feel that their positions are tougher. Although these countries do not want to offend the French Empire, under the promotion of other countries, they are afraid that if they do not join, then when they face invasions from other powers such as the French Empire in the future, these countries may be indifferent to their own plight. Therefore, in this case, they choose to follow. After all, the law does not punish the masses. Although France is strong, it dare not say anything to them. However, just like France's southern neighbor Spain, they will be more cautious and will not take actions such as military opposition to France. As far as I know, although Spain provides weapons to the Kingdom of Siam, it also provides a lot of weapons to France in South Vietnam and the Philippines. Both sides have earned money from arms. Speaking of which, they are not much less than the Netherlands and Britain. Therefore, Spain has always had a good relationship with France. It believes that it has an independent position and relies on France to deal with Britain. Spain's position on the Gibraltar issue, so its attitude is more vague. Hugh Smith, president of Cambridge University, told the Pretoria Times that the Netherlands' position on the Kingdom of Siam and France's Far East is eye-catching. Britain no longer wants to wait and see as it did in the past. The Netherlands is clearly playing a guiding role in France's invasion, which is very rare. Several polls in the Netherlands show that many people support sanctions against the French Empire. They are generally worried that if the Netherlands allows the French Empire to invade the Kingdom of Siam and chooses to turn a blind eye, it may encourage France to implement the same policy in Europe in the future. They are even more afraid that other countries will follow suit and do the same thing in Europe. Professor Rowan Elson of Oxford University in the UK said in an interview with the Financial Times that the International Court of Justice in The Hague, through deliberation and judgment, condemned France's crimes against members of the organization and demanded the immediate withdrawal of French troops, but the resolution was not binding and the enforcement power was in the hands of each country. Many countries expressed their support for condemning and sanctioning the French Empire, indicating that many countries in the world are willing to express their views, but the problem is that the organization has no supervision mechanism to deal with the invasion problem, and it is difficult to deal with the French Empire collectively in a substantial way. Therefore, he is not optimistic about the effectiveness of the organization's sanctions, but he is optimistic about the organization's influence. He believed that if more countries joined the organization, its influence would be unprecedented. He even boldly imagined what would happen if several major countries such as Britain joined. He imagined that it was a feast party. Of course, at that time, a luxurious party with rules was unquestionable. As an ally of France, Paraguay called on all parties concerned to exercise restraint, but Brazil around them ridiculed Paraguay for trying to start a war in South America, but it was too busy to take care of others. For this reason, Paraguay refuted, and the war of words between the two countries escalated. In short, the current situation of the French Empire is worrying, and William IV, the initiator, is watching all this excitedly. He seems to be more looking forward to what will happen next. Chapter 292 Sanctions Bill passed. 1867, under the attention of the world, King Carl XVI of Sweden and King Christian IX of Denmark visited the Netherlands and then coordinated their positions with King William IV of the Netherlands. The three kings directly announced at the subsequent press conference that the three countries agreed to take the lead in imposing sanctions on the French Empire in Amsterdam, and clearly stated that industrial products of the French Empire would not be allowed to enter the territories under the jurisdiction of the three countries, unless France guaranteed that it would no longer invade the Kingdom of Siam. Otherwise the three countries would continue to maintain sanctions on the French Empire. We are all civilized countries, so we do not allow our partners to be invaded by other countries. Although we have limited influence on the French Empire and cannot control or count the territory of France, we can influence the bad initiators to impose sanctions in areas within our power, such as autonomous consumption. Therefore, we will govern within our territory, not elsewhere. Of course, I also call on other countries to join us to show the position of each country to safeguard its own rights and interests and prevent similar incidents from happening again. This is the original words of Dutch Foreign Minister Hespet introducing the positions of the three countries. On April 10, the three countries' respective chambers of parliament passed the sanctions bill against the French Empire, which was formally enacted in the form of legislation and took effect immediately after the document was passed. In other words, the three countries began to formally impose sanctions on the French Empire on April 10. People originally thought that the previous statements of various countries were more of a formal performance, but now it is found that many senior officials in Paris think so. After all, the French Empire has a population of more than 30 million. This is a huge market. Who would give up easily? However, now that these countries have reached the point of legislation, it means that this time it is not just a joke, but a real move. Now, the bankers and people with strong capital in the French Empire are suddenly panicked, because this will be the biggest loss for them. For this reason, it has become a consensus among many of them to start putting pressure on Napoleon III and the Olivier cabinet government at the Palace of Versailles. However, Napoleon III had ruled the French Empire for more than 10 years, and his position had long been stable, so he was able to withstand the pressure from these people in the country. However, he was just stabilizing it. If he had not found a solution for too long, Napoleon III would not be able to continue to face it. After all, to put it bluntly, these people were actually his supporters. If he lost them, his dynasty would collapse. Therefore, Napoleon III began to panic, so he urged the Far East Army to fight quickly and prepare to win the battle in a short period of time, and then negotiate with various countries as a victor to strive for perhaps more benefits. However, facing the provocation led by the Netherlands, Napoleon III would naturally not let the Netherlands live in peace easily, so on the side of northern France close to the Netherlands, France held a massive military exercise with more than 10,000 people to threaten the Netherlands and imply France's anger with the Netherlands. The Netherlands naturally did not want to lag behind and also conducted exercises in the south. At the same time, Denmark and Sweden also participated in the exercises. These two countries also sent a team of more than 500 people to participate, all under the command of the Netherlands. As a result, the French Empire found that they were no longer facing the Netherlands alone, but three countries. The Netherlands alone was not in the eyes of the arrogant Napoleon III, but if Denmark, a naval power, and Sweden, a land power, were added, this would make Napoleon III embarrassed and fearful. The navies of the two countries combined are stronger than the French Empire, and Sweden's army is naturally needless to say, because it has been fighting against the Russian Empire for hundreds of years and could withstand the test. The Netherlands' war in Africa has defeated Britain and Portugal, etc., which has only happened in recent years. The French military evaluated it itself and finally found that the Netherlands' combat power is not weaker than France, and even its military equipment is more luxurious than France. Therefore, the French Empire gave up the idea of military oppression. Napoleon III was ready to send diplomatic envoys to adopt a conciliatory policy towards the three countries, asking them to cancel sanctions or even delay the sanctions, so as to buy more time for the war in the Far East, that is, the legendary policy of appeasement. However, the three countries of the Netherlands did not give any face at all, saying that this had been passed by the House of Representatives, representing the will of the people of various countries, and it was difficult to violate it. They called on the French Empire to immediately change its practices in the Far East and improve the feelings of the people of the three countries towards the changes in France. In short, this requires the French Empire to please the people of the three countries before those sanctions can be eliminated. How could the arrogant Napoleon III and the proud French government accept this? So they decisively recalled the envoys of the three countries and no longer expected the three countries to make changes. They were prepared to retaliate against the three countries for humiliating the French Empire today. Denmark and Sweden, the close allies of the Netherlands, were positive, followed the pace of the Netherlands, and took a tough stance against the French Empire. This was expected by everyone. Napoleon III was just three small and medium-sized countries in Europe. In fact, in the eyes of the big countries, it was only a regional influence. This was just pure disgust for the French Empire. No one thought that this could change the attitude of the French Empire. Sure enough, after the French Empire contacted the three countries, the French Empire actually expressed its dissatisfaction with the three countries, but remained unchanged in the Far East. Obviously, France was obviously not afraid of the impact of the sanctions of the three countries. In other words, Napoleon III chose to ignore the sanctions of the three countries. Even the Palace of Versailles criticized the Kingdom of the Netherlands for being the vanguard of anti-French. In fact, this is true. Since the outbreak of the French Far East Invasion War, the Netherlands has begun to express dissatisfaction with the French Empire many times. The most direct of these is the sale of hundreds of thousands of pounds of advanced weapons to the Kingdom of Siam. This made the French Empire, which originally only had to face opponents with backward weapons, instantly become a group of powerful enemies with weapons like them, causing huge casualties and losses to the French Empire. This originally made France unhappy, and now the sanctions bill that France took the lead in concocting was a second blow to the French Empire, which naturally made the French even more dissatisfied. Therefore, the Netherlands became the target of hostility of the French Empire. However, the Netherlands did not seem to care. Even after the Thorbecke cabinet government took the lead in advancing and retreating with the Kingdom of Denmark and the Kingdom of Sweden, it also suggested to other allies of the Netherlands to join the sanctions scope, further testing the French Empire. Chapter 293, Prime Minister Bismarck has been cooling down. In sharp contrast to the Thorbecke cabinet of the Kingdom of the Netherlands is Bismarck, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Prussia. As early as April 5, before the sanctions were imposed, Prime Minister Bismarck had already launched shuttle diplomacy. He sent special envoys to Paris to express Prussia's support for peace and did not want to see Europe's security and stability affected by the invasion of the French Empire. After the Hague International Court of Justice led by the Kingdom of the Netherlands passed the sanctions ruling, Prime Minister Bismarck sent special envoys to various countries again. Bismarck still did not give up diplomatic efforts, hoping to strive for countries to ease relations and end disputes. When the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden gathered, the three countries directly declared that Napoleon III was a butcher, and then the three countries' parliaments passed sanctions bills. After the French Empire ignored it, the four countries even conducted military exercises on the border between the Netherlands and the French Empire. After the tension escalated, Prime Minister Bismarck immediately stood up to cool down. He stated that Prussia did not want to see the two countries, which were Prussia's neighbors, go to war and advised the four countries not to rashly escalate the situation. Therefore, Prussia seemed to have become a neutral mediator. On April 14, 1867, the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden announced that they would form a joint fleet and conduct a naval exercise with the Kingdom of Siam in the Gulf of Bangkok in the Far East in mid-May, named Storm in the Gulf of Bangkok. This instantly escalated the situation in the Far East. The French Empire invaded the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East, and the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden, actually wanted to conduct a naval exercise next to it. Is this to embolden the Kingdom of Siam? Or is it a threat to the French Navy? Therefore, Paris formally protested to the three countries and asked them to cancel the exercise, otherwise, Paris would not guarantee to retaliate. But the three countries ignored it, just like the last time the three countries asked France to withdraw from the invasion of the Kingdom of Siam and were rejected by France. Just when everyone was wondering when France would retaliate, the Olivier cabinet announced on April 16 that the three countries were prohibited from passing through the English Channel to approach the side of the French Empire. If the ships of the three countries passed, France would detain them. This caused the three countries of the Netherlands to react strongly. The three countries stated that the English Channel did not belong to France, and there was no transit problem, so they did not recognize the status of the French Empire. The International Court of Justice in The Hague followed the statements of the three countries and made a ruling, recognizing that the English Channel belongs to all countries. Even this time, even the pro-French Kingdom of Spain voted in favor in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The English Channel has frequent waterways, and commercial and military ships from southern and northern Europe are intensively connected. If France's self-demarcation of jurisdiction damages the navigation rights of various countries, then if Britain does the same in the future, the English Channel will become yours. Will all countries be blocked? As a result, all countries were dissatisfied with the statement of the Olivier cabinet government of the French Empire, and they accused France one after another, and expressed their disagreement with France's statement. Finally, even the British Claxton government stood up and stated that Britain had no intention of blocking the English Channel and disagreed with the sovereignty of the French Empire. Even Britain said so. Finally, after Paris aroused public outrage, the Olivier government had to slap itself in the face, saying that the statement was incomplete and did not mean to prohibit countries from passing it. At this point, the French Empire found that it was deeply trapped in a diplomatic dilemma. On the contrary, the Netherlands actually received more legitimate support from countries, which further confirmed Napoleon III's diplomatic dwarf status. Perhaps seeing the weak retreat of the French Empire, on April 25, 1867, Argentine President Mitre, Ecuadorian President Moreno, Venezuelan President Herrera, and Colombian President Mosquera jointly visited Amsterdam across the Atlantic to express the concerns of small and medium-sized countries in the Americas. They warned that the French Empire's actions in Paraguay confused them and might not stop at the Kingdom of Siam in the Far East. After all, the example of Mexico is there and will be staged in South America. Countries around the world must do their best to help the Kingdom of Siam overcome the crisis. Out of a sense of crisis, the four South American countries strongly opposed the French Empire's invasion of the Kingdom of Siam. They called on the International Court of Justice in The Hague to increase sanctions on the French Empire and called on the international community to jointly stop the French Empire's criminal behavior of causing trouble everywhere. The statements of the four countries made the situation seem to be like adding water to a boiling oil pan, which made it even more vigorous. While William IV was receiving them, Danish King Christian IX and Swedish King Carl XVI actually visited Amsterdam again in less than 10 days. This made the major powers such as Britain, Prussia, The Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire faintly feel a little strange, but now they are targeting the French Empire, so they chose to sit on the wall and suppress their strange thoughts. Napoleon III of France and Prime Minister Olivier were both uneasy. It seemed that the situation was getting more and more beyond their control. Isn't it just an invasion of a small country in the Far East? How did it develop to the point where it seemed as if the French Empire had invaded countries all over the world and became the target of criticism from all countries? You know, the French Empire is one of the superpowers. This seems to be inconsistent with the treatment that the French Empire should have. What exactly does the Netherlands want to do? Denmark and Sweden were gone before, and now there is a joint visit by 4 South American countries. The circle of Dutch allies is getting bigger and bigger. This is not only the idea of the French Empire, but also the idea of Britain, Prussia and other countries. Unconsciously, the Netherlands has made the major powers fearful. Obviously, the Netherlands seems to have the strength to challenge them, although it is not very obvious. On April 26, 1867, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador and other 7 countries announced in Amsterdam that the 7 countries will hold an Australian exercise in Australia. At the same time, the 7 countries have a unified position on the Kingdom of Siam and stated that they will establish a new security organization. The 7 countries will have the obligation to help member countries when facing military invasions by other countries. The 7 countries also stated that they will establish a trade liberalization organization. The 7 countries have reached a trade community called the South American Trade Community, which can conduct free trade. This is a market with a population difference of 30 million, and it has huge potential, especially for developed countries such as the Netherlands and Denmark, where the shortage of population market and resources will be alleviated. For countries such as Argentina, Venezuela and Colombia, they will receive huge investments, carry out domestic industrial development progress, and increase the employment market. Although it is inevitable that only raw materials are exported, especially food in Argentina, it is undeniable that this is a stable market, which is a huge benefit for all countries. Therefore, they are all very satisfied with the establishment of this organization. As for security, it goes without saying. After all, the Netherlands and Sweden are allies with Argentina, unlike France and Britain, which are just its open protectors, so they are more willing to form an alliance with these 3 countries. In addition to the above, the 4 South American countries naturally stated that they would join the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden in the array of sanctions against the French Empire. So after several people returned to their respective countries, due to their respective strengths, they quickly passed the parliamentary bill. These 4 countries will also join the ranks of the 3 countries to sanction the French Empire, starting on May 1. Chapter 294 The Unfortunate French Empire. 1867, when the Netherlands and the other 6 countries announced sanctions against the French Empire, the old enemy of the French Empire, Britain, hardened its attitude. It joined the sanctions against France at the first opportunity. It even began to speed up the transfer of weapons from the Indian colony to Lower Burma and then sell them to the Kingdom of Siam, which broke the country's practice for many years. At the same time, British Prime Minister Disraeli was protested by anti-French factions in the country, with more than 500,000 people participating in London. The British cabinet government held an emergency cabinet meeting and intended to follow the judgment of the International Court of Justice in The Hague to sanction France. Finally, on April 12, 1867, the British House of Commons officially passed the first British sanctions bill, and also followed the 7 countries to sanction the French Empire. This shocked the world, because this was the first time since the French invasion of the Kingdom of Siam that the most powerful country in Europe participated in the sanctions, and the public opinion in the UK was there. This shows that the relationship between France and Britain will definitely not be settled in a short time, so everyone turned their attention to Paris. At this time, they wanted to see how Napoleon III would deal with such a bad situation. The Royal Palace of the Netherlands. William IV looked at the intelligence in his hand, and finally showed a smug smile on his face. Yes, it was a kind of smugness of being in control of the situation. This time, I want to see how Britain tries to smooth things over. Even if Napoleon III wants to give in, unless he drives the North Parisians out of power, he absolutely cannot and dare not soften. Many people originally thought that Britain was under domestic pressure this time, but if they saw the intelligence in William IV's hand now, this idea would disappear. It turned out that there were other reasons. And the reason is not in Europe. This is the benefit of being familiar with history. William IV murmured with his eyes slightly narrowed. Why was Canada able to gain independence as a country in 1867? It turned out that the reason was France. What happened in 1867? Britain actually agreed to Canada's independence? Canada's path from colony to independence was divided into two steps. The first step was the British North America Act approved by the British Parliament in 1867. Since then, Canada has become a British dominion, close to a sovereign state. The second step was that in the 1990s, with the approval of Queen Elizabeth, Canada could exist as a separate country, except that the nominal head of state continued to be the Queen of England. This was William IV's understanding of Canada in his previous life. But at that time, he had some doubts about why Britain gave power to Canada in 1867. At this time, there were still decades before the First and Second World Wars, and the British Empire was still in its heyday and the world's largest country. William IV couldn't help but wonder, why was it 1867? So, he began to track down a lot of relevant information, and then, combining the information one by one, he finally figured out a lot of the ins and outs. So he incorporated it into this big plan of trapping France. And with the emergence of this detailed intelligence from Mackay Sean, director of the Netherlands International Intelligence Agency, William IV knew that his plan combined with history had worked. Before 1867, the British North American colonies were scattered in Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick and other blocks in Canada. Not only were there large cultural differences between the various parts, but they were also not subordinate to each other. The British royal family played the role of suzerain and mediator. Starting in 1583, the British established their first colony in Newfoundland. Since then, Britain has vigorously expanded to North America, and many areas including the 13 states of North America have been planted with the Union Jack. However, Britain is not the only operator in America. France, the Netherlands, Spain and other countries that followed were also competitors of Britain. However, in the end, the Netherlands and Spain were all in the south, and France, a major European power, was left. It was dissatisfied with Britain's exclusive policy, so it has always maintained a competitive relationship with Britain. The British won the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 and annexed France's territory in Canada. Britain became the only ruler in North America, but this situation did not last long, because the United States was soon established in the 13 states. Although Britain suppressed it, the resentful French Empire, with the support of Spain and the Netherlands, withstood the pressure of the British, and finally beat the British to peace talks and recognized the national status of the United States. Then the British's dominant position in North America was disintegrated from within. The Royalists who continued to advocate the rule of the British king fled to Canada in the north, while the Americans wanted to drive the British away, showing an increasingly strong desire for expansion. The Second Anglo-American War, which the Americans provoked in 1812 and wanted to make a comeback, was an attempt by the Americans to annex Canada. Although Britain won the war, it had to think about the fate of British Canada's colonies in the future. The state of divide and rule for the Canadian provinces was originally in line with Britain's traditional interests, but the turbulent international situation did not allow Britain to continue in this way. In particular, there were conflicts between the British, Dutch and French in Canada. Until today in 1867, it was wavering between the two major groups of British and French. In 1837, the French Canadians were dissatisfied with the rule of the British, so they started a war. Although it was finally calmed down, the British royal family and the cabinet government had to think about how to prevent such incidents from happening again. At the suggestion of the Earl of Durham, the Governor-General of Canada, Upper Canada and Lower Canada were merged into the province of Canada, hoping that the two major groups could get along in peace and create conditions for Canada to move towards unification. The concessions made by the British and the British government and the royal family partially calmed the dissatisfaction of the French. In 1861, during the American Civil War, the Northern American Confederation and the Southern American Confederacy launched a brutal bloody battle for 6 years. Although Britain expressed neutrality at the beginning, it secretly supported the South. After all, the southern states have always been the source of raw materials for Britain. Britain even designed and built a cruiser named Alabama, for which a large number of merchant ships in the North were sunk. In order to express its protest, the North even directly threatened to compensate Britain with Canadian land. The attitude of the American Confederacy made Britain feel threatened. If Canada was not integrated into a unified force, it would be difficult to guarantee that the War of 1812 would not be repeated. In addition to the American Confederacy in the North, there were also major changes on the European continent. Among them, the most feared thing for the British was the strong rise of Prussia. A few years ago, the King of Prussia began the road to unify the German Confederation. Prime Minister Bismarck first joined forces with Austria to defeat Denmark, and then turned around and defeated Austria and expelled it from the German Confederation in just 7 weeks, and simply brought down the former largest country in the German Confederation. This shocked the entire British people, from the Queen and nobles to the common people. Therefore, the British people believed that the Kingdom of Prussia, which occupied all parts of the German Confederation, must be the new power of Europe. In this way, Britain's balance of power diplomacy would inevitably be challenged, and Britain would have to invest more energy and resources in the affairs of the British continent. At this time, Canada, which is far more than North America, naturally needs to be self-reliant. It is precisely because of this that the British government strives to keep the Confederate States of America in the South as the bottom line. After making a few concessions in Canada, it will be willing to reconcile with the Confederate States of America in a low-key manner and cede British Columbia to them in order to reduce the expansion of the front line and make it difficult to take both into account. At the same time, Britain was preparing to reconcile with the Russian Empire, and would no longer care even if it allowed the Russian Empire to gain advantages in the Balkans and the Caucasus. A few years ago, when Britain learned that the Netherlands and Tsarist Russia had reached a preliminary agreement and that Tsarist Russia would sell the Alaska Peninsula to the Netherlands, although Britain was dissatisfied on the surface, it was not slow to act privately. In order to maintain Britain's position in North America and the management of Canada, they agreed to the merger of the Canadian province, now Quebec and Ontario, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick on July 1, 1865, the first month after they learned about it, to form the federal form of the Dominion of Canada. This day was also the same day as the Canada Day familiar to William IV. After that, Canada took advantage of the fact that the United States was divided during the Civil War and had no time to take care of them, and gradually integrated all of Britain's Canadian colonies. After the reconciliation between the North and the South of the United States, the Confederate States of America in the North could only occupy the western province of British Columbia in the name of revenge, and the others had been integrated. Your Majesty, Napoleon I never dreamed that he wanted to incite the French Canadians to resist British rule, but because of the wrong timing, he has now put himself in an already passive situation, which is even more embarrassing. William IV nodded thoughtfully. After seeing the United States of America take over British Columbia, the French Canadians actually launched a rebellion in Quebec. And they also got the support of France, and even hooked up with some people in the United States of America, which naturally made London furious. So Britain did not want to break the North American peace agreement that had just been reached, and vented its anger on the French Empire, which was being sanctioned by various countries. Napoleon III is indeed a famous diplomatic loser in history. Every time he made a move, he would turn a situation that was originally favorable to France into an unfavorable situation. Although it was because of his own calculations against the French Empire, Napoleon III himself jumped into the pit and danced casually, and William IV could do nothing about it. Alice, it is not easy for a big country these days. Macation, Your Majesty, do you want to notify the ambassadors and others abroad and ask them to step up coordination with these countries to join the camp of sanctions against the French Empire? Why are you sure they will join our sanctions? William IV asked casually. Macation, now this is the trend of the international community. I think all countries can see it clearly. It was reasonable before. Now that Britain has joined, I think other countries will not fall behind. Britain has taken action, will other countries still hesitate? What kind of logic is this? Can other countries be allowed to choose whether to impose sanctions or not? William IV shook his head and said something that surprised Macation. He said, Bismarck is a more profound person. I think his attitude may be different from yours. Chapter 295. Is the Russian Empire the only one left? In the Americas, only Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador agreed to sanction the French Empire, but those countries with strong relations with the French Empire were unwilling to take action because they did not need to offend a European power. Before the British announced the sanctions, as Britain also joined the sanctions, the Americas suddenly became turbulent, and other countries also changed. Paraguay and Mexico, allies of the French Empire, even claimed that the invasion of the French Empire was the right approach. In order to counter the influence of the United States and Mexico, the Mexican Emperor Maximilian I of the French Empire and the President of Paraguay Peles have even announced their support for the French Empire and announced the purchase of the French Empire's industry and weapons, claiming that this is a manifestation of friendship between the two countries. For this reason, both the North and South of the United States expressed their dissatisfaction with Maximilian I and demanded that the country withdraw from the agreement between France and Mexico. The United States even demanded that the French Empire withdraw from Mexico, otherwise the two sides would impose sanctions on France. However, Napoleon III, who was numb to the word sanctions, only felt resentment, and did not yield under duress. Therefore, the answer that the United States of America naturally received was the French Empire's veto. Therefore, the two countries of the United States also joined the ranks of criticizing the French Empire. For this reason, many people said that the two countries of the United States were just looking for excuses. After all, there were many French people in the two countries, and this was the best way to shut them up. Therefore, Dutch political expert, Dean of the School of Diplomacy of Leiden University, Herman van Rompuy, said in an interview, "This is a question of legitimacy, that is, this series of sanctions is not authorized by the alliance of all countries, so it is not politically law enforcement in the world. Therefore, in the international community, countries are not obliged to participate in sanctions compulsorily, and in actual policy, the nature of countries seeking benefits and avoiding harm also makes them unwilling to take measures that undermine relations with the French Empire." In other words, most countries are unwilling to take sides. The attitudes of European powers and European countries changed from soft to hard after the French Empire declared war on the Kingdom of Siam. Before the war, Britain was unwilling to break up with the French Empire and refused to give up the balance of power relationship with the French Empire. In terms of supporting the Kingdom of Siam, Britain had only legitimately sold ordinary small arms before. Even at the beginning, many of the weapons sold by Britain were old-fashioned flintlock weapons, which were sneered at by the Kingdom of Siam. But after the war gradually expanded, especially when the unrest in the Dominion of Canada in North America was reported and the French government participated, Britain angrily suppressed it. So the anger was directed at the French Empire. Britain immediately reversed its position and generously sent several batches of the most advanced rifles and other advanced weapons used by the British military. Disraeli, the Prime Minister of the British Tory cabinet, reversed the practice of the previous Prime Minister Palmerston, changed the practice of not participating in European affairs at will, and announced sanctions against the French Empire. In the end, the French Empire also imposed counter-sanctions on Britain, not only withdrawing from the friendly jurisdiction relationship with Britain in the English Channel, but also withdrawing from many bilateral relations. This made the situation in the Far East more intense as the European continent unfolded. Therefore, in Belgium, the French and the Belgians led by Leopold II even more escalated the confrontation on the streets of Belgium, while the Dutch became the internal mediator of the Kingdom of Belgium, which made the rule of Prime Minister Jules Darneton and Speaker Joseph Beit more stable. However, because the Dutch government's position was inclined to sanction the French Empire, the French Empire eventually found that Belgium had also passed legislation to sanction France and joined in the sanctions. This made the French people in Belgium extremely angry, but it was of no avail, because their population base had become less than 20% of Belgium, and their weight was not enough to push the required votes for all parliamentary approvals. However, compared with Britain, Prussia was striving for peace talks, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire was afraid to throw the mouse. Just like Britain at the beginning, Spain bought a lot of weapons from the French Empire, and the French Empire sold arms to Spain, and Spain was the most advanced weapon buyer customer of France. According to previous data from the Amsterdam Peace Research Institute, although Spain was also an arms exporter from 1860 to 1865, it was also a major arms importer. 30% of the armaments used by the country's army came from the French Empire, so Spain's hesitation to impose sanctions at the beginning was understandable. However, Sweden broke the convention to support the Netherlands, highlighting the alliance between the Netherlands and Sweden. Sweden has been neutral since 1815 to guard against the Russian Empire. It has chosen to be friendly to other countries, so it has always chosen an ambiguous attitude towards the development of the situation in Europe. Even when Prussia invaded Denmark, Sweden chose to turn a blind eye, showing an unwillingness to participate in it, which once made the Kingdom of Denmark very angry. In this regard, Herman van Perron said that this involves the issue of the international system. There are too many zero points, which hinders the response to major international events. These are all issues that countries should reflect on, how to reform and eliminate the accumulated problems. Even so, he said that this is actually a struggle between several parties in the European situation. Sweden and other countries are no longer on the sidelines, and it is not as easy as before. Therefore, it is better to choose sides in the end. He also said that the European and American countries that responded to the sanctions this time were mainly those that were not very friendly to the French Empire and had always been wary of French influence. Within European and American countries, the breadth and intensity of these countries' sanctions were also related to their economic and military dependence on the French Empire. In fact, these countries were not very economically dependent. Even the Netherlands had already been out of the influence of France to a certain extent in terms of economic and military autonomy, not to mention the United Kingdom. Therefore, they did not have too many concerns about sanctions against the French Empire. However, countries like Spain, because of the friendly relations between the two countries and the serious overlap in economic and military intimacy, could not decouple from the French Empire in terms of armaments and economy. However, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was always cautious because it was highly dependent on the industrial support of the French Empire. When facing anti-French people at home, Franz Joseph I warned at the beginning of the sanctions that if the Austro-Hungarian Empire imposed sanctions on France, it would cause an economic recession in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He pointed out that the Austro-Hungarian Empire would appropriately reduce its industrial dependence on France. Now cutting off all industrial economy with the French Empire would catch the Austro-Hungarian Empire off guard. He further told the people that there was no major dispute between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the French Empire, and they had common basic interests in the balance of power on the European continent. Many people speculated that this was because the Austro-Hungarian Empire and France were also facing the threat of the newly rising power, the Kingdom of Prussia. Obviously, Franz Joseph I did not want to worry about the Kingdom of Prussia, which had not appeared on the list of sanctioned countries so far, and this directed attention to Prussia, which was an old fox. As a result, among the major powers, only the Russian Empire had not yet expressed any attitude towards the French Empire. European and American countries turned their attention to St. Petersburg, as if waiting for Alexander II to speak. Chapter 296, Japan is no longer low-key. 1867, when everyone was paying attention to the attitude of the Russian Empire towards the sanctions imposed on the French Empire, the small country of Japan in the Far East attracted the attention of all countries. Because on this day, the country's new Emperor Meiji announced that Japan, led by him, would enter a national reform, and the Cabinet Elders Conference was directly named Meiji Restoration. At the same time, he announced that he would not join any ranks against Western countries, so his Japan would not sanction the French Empire, but would continue to use diplomatic actions to call on the French Empire not to wage war against the Kingdom of Siam, because Japan did not want to see such a thing that caused the death of innocent people. At the same time, he called on Western countries to increase investment in Japan and help Japan's economic development. At the same time, Emperor Meiji also announced that Japan would purchase the strongest Mauser rifles with more than 10,000 matching ammunition in the European army equipment from the Netherlands, and at the same time purchase 2 naval battleships from the most powerful naval power, Britain. After the announcement of these arms purchases, European and American countries could not help but reveal greed. Obviously, seeing the fate of the Kingdom of Siam, the Meiji Emperor had just taken back power from the Tokugawa shogunate's ruler, Tokugawa Yoshinobu. In order to appease various countries, especially Britain, and to check and balance Britain, the Netherlands, which was now a big trend, was pulled in. Therefore, these 2 arms purchases can be said to be a carefully designed balance. What's more, this is also a protective effect brought by the purchase of arms. It seems to remind those countries that have ambitions for Japan that their interests are closely related to powerful countries such as Britain and the Netherlands, and remind countries not to use the practices of the French Empire on Japan. The Meiji Emperor also appealed to Britain and the Netherlands for protection. In the end, Britain and the Netherlands passed the arms purchase in London and Amsterdam, and the Meiji Emperor of Japan finally breathed a sigh of relief. European and American countries are interested in this poor country with a population of more than 40 million. After all, Tens of millions of people mean a huge market. Among them, the Netherlands and Britain, which had established commercial relations with Japan as early as the 18th century, attached great importance to it. The two countries expressed their willingness to provide the help needed for Japan's reform, including funds and technology, and the two countries strived to occupy more market share. The Lincoln government and the Davis government of the United States also successively asked the Meiji Emperor to open their domestic markets to the two countries. The extremely weak Japan had no choice but to nod in response. Seeing this, other European and American countries came one after another. In response, Japan entered an era of using European and American technology to cooperate with its own reforms. Although many people in the country believed that this was economic colonization, more people believed that this was friendly because the lives of civilians in the country had become better. William IV didn't care about the feelings of the Japanese people. He just thought about how to occupy more of Japan's market share. As early as the 18th century, Japan was the most important producer of platinum in the Netherlands. However, in the war between Britain and the Netherlands, in order to contain the Netherlands, Britain began to block the flow of Dutch silver in Japan into the Netherlands, so it entered the country. The two sides fought and those in power joined their respective ranks. In the end, the Netherlands was robbed of its share by Britain, and the Tokugawa shogunate turned to Britain. However, after entering the 1850s, the voices against the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan became louder and louder. Finally, after 1850, the previous emperor, Emperor Komei, began to suppress the power of the Tokugawa shogunate, but he was not successful. He died in early January this year, and Crown Prince Mutsuhito succeeded to the throne, named Meiji. Meiji received a good cultural education since childhood and was proficient in Chinese, Japanese and other Confucian classics. However, since his grandfather, the European and American Western capital powers, led by his grandfather in 1854, forced Japan to sign an unequal treaty with them, completely opening the door to Japan, under the increasingly urgent national crisis, the country began to accept the situation and began to accept Japan's westernization. Acquire considerable knowledge of Western science and thought and learn the development trends at home and abroad, etc. Because of this, although Prince Mutsuhito, who was only a few years old, lived in the palace, he was influenced by this and began to actively face the West. He was also unconsciously impacted by the trend of thought and influenced by Western civilization to varying degrees, so he had great ambitions to reform society. In 1860, his father, Emperor Komei, promoted the action of overthrowing the powerful Tokugawa shogunate. He saw his father's desire to return the royal power, so he agreed with this approach very much. However, he didn't expect that his father, Emperor Komei, passed away before he succeeded. So when Emperor Meiji first inherited the throne, the feudal rule of the Tokugawa shogunate was crumbling. Because the Tokugawa shogunate was helpless against the invasion of Western countries, Britain's dominance in Japan began to be invaded, so the Tokugawa family's influence in the country declined. Under the operation of the royal family, the movement of respecting the emperor and expelling the barbarians that had emerged on the major islands of the country had gradually developed into the movement of respecting the emperor and overthrowing the shogunate. The lower-level samurai who advocated the reform of the bourgeoisie in the southwestern strong tribes, such as Chushu and Satsuma, who participated in the movement of respecting the emperor and overthrowing the shogunate, were represented by Takubo Toshimichi and Kido Takeyoshi. Most of them were born in the middle and lower classes of Japan. They had strong dissatisfaction and deep worries about the current situation of society and attempted to find a way out that was beneficial to themselves in the social transformation itself. This made them demand to overthrow the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. They worked together to change the current political situation in Japan, participated in the political reforms of various tribes, and firmly grasped the real power in the tribe. In order to further strengthen their own power, they took the power of Japan after the 12th century, tightened the exclusion and cold treatment of the Tokugawa shogunate, and lifted the royal family, which was deeply opposed to the Tokugawa shogunate, as their backer. Facts have proved that this is right. The deceased Emperor Komei and the current Emperor Meiji are close to them. Finally, in January 1867, Emperor Meiji convened a secret meeting of the two powerful reform factions of Satsuma and Choshu, formulated an action plan to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate by force, and passed the action of eliminating the court of the Tokugawa shogunate. In the end, they succeeded. In order to save his position in life, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the head of the Tokugawa shogunate, preemptively submitted a report of returning the great government to Emperor Meiji on January 10, 1867, indicating that he would resign from the position of shogun. However, at this time, the anti-shogunate faction that was in power launched a political uprising within the Tokugawa internal rule, and ordered the Tokugawa shogunate to peacefully hand over power to Emperor Meiji. In March, the five-article oath was issued, and then the anti-shogunate army defeated the shogunate army near Kyoto, and soon occupied Edo. Emperor Meiji renamed Edo to Tokyo, and officially announced it as the capital on January 20. Unexpectedly, Japan, which had been keeping a low profile for 4 months, showed up. William Ivy's eyes suddenly sparkled, and he began to plan and calculate something. Meiji Restoration? The three heroes of the Restoration? I am here in this life, and I will watch how you, Japan, rise. In my eyes, you are nothing more than the nourishment for the rise of the Netherlands. Chapter 297, To deal with the enemy, you must hug him tightly. 1867, William IV of the Kingdom of the Netherlands sent a delegation headed by William Senior Official Chancellor Van Hall to Japan in the Far East, with the aim of strengthening economic cooperation between the two countries, especially in the Far East. After landing in eastern Japan on the 7th, Hall's arrival was highly valued by Emperor Meiji, but he had no choice but to take it seriously. The wind of sanctions against the French Empire by the Netherlands in Europe blew all over the world. He saw all this, so he almost put the Netherlands on the same level as Britain. After all, how could he dare to underestimate a powerful and independent Britain and a successful team of the Kingdom of the Netherlands that was not weaker than Britain? After Emperor Meiji visited Hall and others, he sent his capable subordinates, Amakubo Toshimichi, Seigo Takamori and Kido Takeyoshi, to meet Hall and others. Hall naturally knew that the three people in front of him were the most powerful people in Japan after Emperor Meiji, so he did not act like a white supremacist. So when these three people faced the white people of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, one of the world's great powers, they were nervous and started the talks with the Netherlands taking the initiative, and they could only be passive. In the end, Hall and others, who firmly grasped the initiative, finally took the initiative. Economic benefits, of course, the political mission ordered by Amsterdam was not forgotten. The Dutch delegation finally reached an agreement with Japan on Far East economic cooperation. Japan in the Far East once again became a labor and resource provider for the Netherlands and became one of the raw material producers for William IV's Far East construction. Seeing that the Netherlands' actions in the Far East had yielded huge gains, the United States of America also began to join the ranks of the Netherlands and sent Secretary of State Seward to visit Tokyo. Your Majesty, the United States of America has signed a peace agreement with Britain, but I didn't expect it to be so soon that it has become restless. Thorbecke frowned, feeling a little dissatisfied. According to what I said, we should have stopped our tripartite talks at the beginning. It is in our best interest to continue the war. William IV smiled bitterly. He almost quarreled with Thorbecke for this matter. However, he reluctantly gave up after he said that he should be careful that the French Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia would become too powerful and Britain would be too weak, which would not be good for the Netherlands. Unexpectedly, the Lincoln government of the United States of America followed suit, and the Prime Minister's stubborn temper came back. However, I have to admit that President Lincoln of the United States of America did a bit of a dishonest thing. The British haven't even started yet, and you can't wait to start. William IV changed the subject and said, Lincoln is not a simple person. I am actually very afraid of him. Thorbecke's attention was successfully diverted, and he praised, of course it is not simple. A slave emancipation law is enough to make the North invincible. After all, there are black slaves everywhere in the South, which has almost disintegrated the strength of the South from within. The cohesion of the North has also increased, and it has also gained prestige. It can be said that his means are extraordinary. It's a pity that he is a citizen of the United States. If the United States really wants to implement Secretary of State Seward's westward Pacific policy. At this point, Thorbecke said with an unsightly face, sooner or later, they will compete with us, so we need to be prepared. William IV nodded and agreed with Thorbecke's words. In fact, he knew better than anyone else of this era that going west was their future national policy. Seward and Lincoln were just the founders. The American rulers after that would not be able to expand their power in the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, it had been completely occupied by European countries and could not expand. The Pacific Ocean was a place to be developed. At least in their opinion, it should be easier to grab a lot of territory. Otherwise, the United States would not have snatched the Philippines from Spain at the end of the 19th century when Spain was weak. Before that, it had taken the Hawaiian Islands from Britain, France and other countries. Therefore, William IV, who was familiar with history, was wary of the United States, which was ranked third after Britain and Prussia, and even before the French Empire led by Napoleon III. William IV sighed. Lincoln was born to eat politics. His methods are not just these. He is also unmatched in boldly benefiting his political enemies. Seeing that Thorbecke was confused, William IV began to explain. In 1861, when Lincoln, who had just come to power, was pushed into power by discontent in the South, the threat to his life was so dangerous that he had to sneak into Washington. The situation of military confrontation between the North and the South became more and more serious and dangerous, and more worrying. When Lincoln arrived in Washington, he looked at the Potomac River and the flag of the Southern Confederacy flying over Fort Alexandria. That is, those loyal to the federal government felt more and more crisis. As the first leader of this new party composed of two conflicting forces, those who strongly advocated the abolition of slavery and those old Whigs who remained in the Federation, the Republican Party was his party. He had to maintain factional disputes within the party. Only by uniting everyone can the unity of the whole country be maintained. In the process, he did not use only his own party members in the formation of the cabinet. When he selected cabinet members, he not only selected his staunch followers, but also decided to pull his enemies on board to work together. He selected Salmon Chase, who was known for his fanatical radicalism, and William Seward, who was known for his cautiousness, into the cabinet government. Among his cabinet members who were very different from each other, it can be said that there were only two things in common. Each member hated the others, each believed that he was more suitable for the position of president than Lincoln, and more suitable to be president. "They can't wait to eat you up," someone reminded him. "Every one of them seems to want to kill the others as well," Lincoln replied with a humorous tone of thinking that a political veteran could use. With Lincoln's shrewdness and tenacity, he had enough ability to find powerful people under his command, arrange suitable positions for them, and supervise them under his nose, so that he could better supervise and guard against them, instead of being confused and unable to guard against them. William IV said this: "Hold your friends tightly, but you must hug your enemies even tighter, hug them tightly enough so that they can't even move." Good method. So insightful. Thorbecke looked at William IV with admiration. The latter shook his head and said, "Although this is my summary, this is Lincoln's method." The two of them talked to each other as king and minister, but President Lincoln in the United States didn't know that he had been remembered by someone. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298, White House Factions. North America, United States of America, White House. President Lincoln held a cabinet meeting. In addition to President Lincoln, Irish, the participants also included Vice President and Senate President Andrew Johnson, Dutch, Secretary of State Seward, German, Secretary of the Treasury James Speed, Dutch, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, German, Secretary of the Interior Elihu B. Washburn, Irish, Attorney General Marty Grice, Dutch, Secretary of Agriculture Gallant, Irish, Secretary of Industry Mayorkas, Spanish, Postal Secretary Larry O'Brien, Irish, Secretary of Education Gallant, German, and Secretary of Energy Granholm, Italian. Your Excellency President, now that the new ruler of Japan in the Western Pacific, Emperor Meiji, holds great power and has officially announced that he will learn Western culture and technology from the West, we can take this opportunity to expand the presence of the United States of America in this country with a population of over 40 million. We cannot allow Britain and the Netherlands to compete for hegemony here. This is definitely a very good opportunity for us. It is the best time for the United States of America to intervene in the region. Secretary of State Seward's deep eyes shot at a hidden light, and he said without humility, "If the United States of America can gain a foothold in Japan, then the United States of America will break the bottleneck of development in the future and will fly in another direction of the United States to find a way of development. I call it the double-headed eagle policy." Puff a laugh, but it broke the grand blueprint that Seward had worked hard to create, and the atmosphere was broken. Everyone couldn't help but look at the person next to them. When their eyes went to him, everyone found that it was James Speed, the Secretary of Finance of the United States of America. The latter pursed his lips and said sorry, but his face looked at Secretary of State Seward with bad intentions. Secretary of State Seward secretly thought it was not good. He and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and Secretary of Education Gallant quickly exchanged eyes, and obviously saw the helplessness of the other two. Secretary of State Seward secretly said, "These Dutch guys have become more and more arrogant recently. We have to think of a way to deal with them," but he secretly glanced at Vice President Andrew Johnson next to President Lincoln. Andrew Johnson was indeed a strong enemy. Every time he dealt with others, he would stay out of the matter. In fact, he was the one behind the scenes. This time, he didn't need to think about it, and he knew that the deliberate interruption of Secretary of the Treasury James Speed must have come from his instruction. Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of the Treasury James Speed, and Attorney General Marty Grice were the representatives of the United States of America in the current Lincoln government. It was also the second largest faction in the United States of America, equal to the German faction, except for the Irish faction. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but secretly hate that Lincoln was indeed an old fox. He knew how to use the Dutch to suppress the Germans, but let the Irish dominate. However, he was dissatisfied, but he had to admit that this balance was not bad. At least the British and French were not in Lincoln's cabinet. Suddenly, he had an idea and looked at the Spanish Minister of Industry Mayorkas and the Italian Minister of Energy Granholm. These two people have always been centrists. Perhaps they can be won over. Of course, the premise is that the Irish behind Lincoln do not get involved. But is it possible? Seeing Seward's embarrassed face, President Lincoln smiled secretly and asked with dissatisfaction, "James Speed, this is not a polite behavior. You know, this office was established with the support of millions of taxpayers of the United States of America. Every order issued here is enough to change the lives of the United States of America and even many countries in the world. Therefore, we must maintain solemnity here. I think when we take the oath of allegiance to the national interest, we must be honest in our hearts, right?" Upon hearing this, Secretary of the Treasury James Speed's face straightened and he said very seriously, "Yes, God can testify that my loyalty is to the United States of America." "Well, in that case, can I hear your explanation? You know, it's not just me. Now the cabinet members are looking forward to your answer." Lincoln looked at James Speed with bright eyes. His eyes were sparkling, and his eyes seemed to be expectant, but more like oppression. Secretary of the Treasury James Speed couldn't help but lower his head slightly to show his respect for the president. He said, "I feel Secretary Seward's patriotism very much, so I have been watching the Secretary of State's various suggestions for the country and more. For this reason, I also silently put myself in other people's shoes and tried to introduce the Secretary of State's difficulties into the Secretary of State to see what the result would be. In the end." Lincoln asked, "What happened in the end? You should explain it clearly." James Speed smiled bitterly and said, "In the end, I found that our Ministry of Finance seemed to be difficult to keep up with the Secretary of State. The railways in the western states alone spent more than 20% of the fiscal budget. Since 1861, we have been fighting nonstop for the past 6 years. Our fiscal tax revenue has actually decreased by more than 10%. Domestic industrial growth has almost stopped. On the contrary, foreign industrial countries are developing rapidly. As one rises and the other falls, we are lagging behind a lot. What's more," James Speed glanced at Lincoln and said, "What's more, now that the South is independent, our national strength has actually decreased. As soon as the war with Britain and the South ceased, we set sail in the Western Pacific. It seems that we are going back to the battlefield without caring about the wounds that have not stopped bleeding. Therefore, if Japan rashly collides with Britain or the Netherlands, or even goes to war, when our treasury budget is difficult to support, of course, this is what I least want. I think we should take care of our bodies for the time being before heading west to the Pacific Ocean, which is what we need to do most at the moment." When he saw Secretary of State Seward was about to speak, he spoke first. "Even if we want to march into the Western Pacific, I think we should wait until the French Empire's invasion of the Kingdom of Siam has subsided. That's the best time for us to participate, not the source of the current conflict." There was another sentence he didn't say. "Even if we want to join the competition over there, we shouldn't follow the path of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, not be as radical as Seward. Obviously, the Kingdom of Prussia and Berlin should have issued some instructions. Obviously, they want to make the water more turbid, so that the Kingdom of Prussia, which has just annexed the German Confederation, has time to digest it. After digesting it, they can participate in it and benefit from it. Obviously, Seward's purpose should be this. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at the Vice President Andrew Johnson next to him. Chapter 299, Your Majesty wants to take action within the United States? The White House continued to stage the drama of factional fighting in the Republican cabinet, but William Ivey in Amsterdam soon found out. At present, in the cabinet government of the United States, the most powerful faction is the Irish, headed by President Lincoln, assisted by Secretary of the Interior Elihu B. Washburne, Secretary of Agriculture Gallant, and Postmaster General Larry O'Brien. The second is the Dutch, headed by Vice President Andrew Johnson, assisted by Secretary of the Treasury James Speed and Attorney General Marty Grice. The third is the German, headed by Secretary of State Seward, assisted by Secretary of War, later changed to Secretary of Defense, Edwin Stanton, and Secretary of Education Gallant. The fourth is the Spanish Minister of Industry Mayorkas and the Italian Minister of Energy Granholm. My Prime Minister, looking at this list in front of you, what do you think of? William Ivey looked at the Dutch Prime Minister Thorbecke with a wise look. The latter paused, and he looked up at William Ivey. He didn't know when, but he saw that the Majesty, who had just inherited the throne a few years ago and had unfamiliar and immature means of governing the country and needed his own assistance, had transformed from being immature and had the momentum of a king of a great country. Compared with the 5 major European countries he had met, Queen Victoria, Alexander II, Napoleon III, Franz Joseph I, and William I, he seemed to be no less than them. He felt relieved in his heart. This was a wise leader he assisted. What else could he ask for? He then answered proudly, Your Majesty, are you interested in President Lincoln's talent for managing the cabinet mentioned before? And the balance of interests of all parties, for his use? William Ivey shook his head and looked at him silently, as if waiting for his next answer. The pride that had just risen was extinguished by the rejection. Thorbecke looked at William Ivey calmly, and the latter was calm. After a moment, Thorbecke's heart moved, as if he had gained something, and he said, Your Majesty wants to break the balance of the Lincoln cabinet government and make the Lincoln cabinet government have no time to take care of other things? No. Prime Minister Thorbecke exclaimed, Does Your Majesty want to use our knowledge of the results of the Lincoln cabinet meeting last week to prepare to block the United States of America's intention to purchase the Kamchatka Peninsula in the far northeast Pacific from the Russian Empire? William Ivey was stunned when he heard this. The United States of America actually wanted to purchase the Kamchatka Peninsula in the west of the Bering Sea. This was the decision that Lincoln personally made after the last Lincoln cabinet government meeting. As expected of him, he was the person who was ranked first in the list of the greatest figures of the hegemonic country, the American Empire, for many consecutive years. In this cabinet meeting, he used the Dutch as a knife to cut the German Secretary of State Seward to prevent his radical westward advance to the Pacific Ocean, preparing to create a conflict and then provide opportunities for American arms dealers in foreign policy. At the same time, Lincoln used the Germans to deal with the Dutch. Although Vice President Andrew Johnson did not say a word, no one would think that Secretary of the Treasury James Speed and Attorney General Marty Grice were no longer his direct allies. However, he used Seward's anger to transfer it to the Netherlands. In the end, Seward prevented the United States from joining the South American alliance to sanction the French Empire. In the name of using the original words of Secretary of the Treasury James Speed, that is, the United States had just gone through several wars and was not suitable to start a war with other countries. Therefore, the United States should not follow the Netherlands and other South American countries to offend the European power, the French Empire. After the effect was achieved, Lincoln deliberately brought in the neutral Spanish Energy Minister Granholm and the Spanish Minister of Industry Mayorkas to express their views. In the end, the two of them, needless to say, always observed the words and expressions, and Lincoln's attitude was very clear. So they did not agree that it was now against the French Empire, so Secretary of State Seward seemed to have won back a city, but the biggest winner was still President Lincoln, because all the bills did not seem to be out of his plan. Seeing that William Ivey did not admit his right or wrong, Thorbecke asked again, Secretary of State Seward actually proposed to the President to make friends with Japan to counter the presence of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the Pacific? So we have to unite with the Dutch in America to suppress the Germans? William IV smiled and said, "Yes, Prime Minister, I think we should stop this guy. After all, we can't watch the diplomatic department of the Federal Republic of America and our Kingdom of the Netherlands change from the current alliance relationship to the enemy under his leadership. This should never happen." Just when Thorbecke thought that William IV's answer was this, William IV suddenly said, "However, recently Seward is secondary. He is just a representative of the arms dealer of the Federal Republic of America. A new person will be promoted at any time." Wrong again? Thorbecke wanted to curse. He re-examined William IV and found that in recent years, he really began to misjudge the other party's king's ability. Obviously, it was right for His Majesty William II to abdicate, but the Netherlands needed such a king to lead. He was looking forward to what the Netherlands would look like after it became powerful. He was confident that this day was far away. The Secretary of State is just a representative of the arms dealer. Thorbecke suddenly thought of something. His hands trembled, and he looked up suddenly, looking at William IV in disbelief. No, how could His Majesty think that way? If it were true, as long as a little bit of news was leaked, it would cause an uproar and even attract attacks from various countries. After all, the United States of America is a gathering of immigrants from various countries. Although these immigrants usually look like abandoned people and abandoned children of various countries, that is the idea of ordinary people. Only when you become a high-level person in Europe like him, you will understand what kind of wonderful use the immigrants there are. Not to mention the distant past, many people don't know about the rise of the Kingdom of Prussia. In fact, if there was no help from the 2 million Germans in the United States of America, Prussia's industrial technology would be difficult to achieve under the defense of Britain and France. After absorbing British and French technology from the United States of America and returning to Berlin, this is the reason for the rise of the Kingdom of Prussia. Therefore, if the Netherlands just ignored those rules and destroyed the cake of various countries, then the end of the Netherlands would definitely be a certain degree of bad, at least not much better than the end of Britain in North America, where European countries supported the United States to confront the United States. Knowing this, he felt palpitations for his speculation. He even hoped that he was just speculating and that His Majesty William IV would not do this. Chapter 300, Purchase Phu Quoc Island and Kamchatka Peninsula? 1867, the French Empire launched an attack on the city of Kampong Cham in the north of Phnom Penh in the Cambodian region of the Kingdom of Siam. Chulalongkorn, the crown prince of the Kingdom of Siam, led the Siamese soldiers to fight back with all their might. Although the French Empire finally won and occupied the city, it suffered heavy losses because the Siamese side was familiar with the terrain. The French Empire had 20,000 French troops and 10,000 South Vietnamese vassal troops participating in the war, and the Kingdom of Siam had 40,000 troops. In this war, the French army suffered more than 5,000 casualties, and the vassal army also exceeded 4,000. The casualties and losses of the Kingdom of Siam were only 12,000. Although it seems that the French army's losses are smaller than those of the Kingdom of Siam, it must be known that this is the Far East. The loss of the French army this time has caused a sharp decrease in the number of French garrisons. Therefore, if the army is increased, it will have a huge impact on the situation of the French army in the Far East. The French side may even change from offensive to defensive. If the Kingdom of Siam organizes a sufficient number of troops, it may launch a counterattack against the French Far East army. When the news of the tragic victory in the Far East came, Napoleon III was happy at first, but then worried. As a last resort, he once again sent 20,000 people from the French native army to support the mobilization. Although many people in the country began to oppose his Far East policy, due to the victory, the voices were still relatively small and could be suppressed. However, Napoleon III still couldn't help but worry that the progress in the Far East was slow, and sanctions from European and American countries were coming. More countries might join this ranks, which would cause the French Empire to gradually lose its international prestige while also losing its own strength. The Far East campaign must be fought quickly, otherwise it will affect other strategies of the French Empire, Napoleon III decided secretly. In fact, Napoleon II's idea was right, because just when he was worried about the situation of the French Empire because of the war in the Far East and the Kingdom of Siam, William IV launched a new provocation, yes, a provocation. On May 12, 1867, the Netherlands sent Foreign Minister Hubert van to visit Bangkok, the Kingdom of Siam. During the visit, Hespert von constantly emphasized the interests of the Netherlands in the Kingdom of Siam and asked the French Empire not to harm the interests of the Netherlands. Among them, the Dutch industrial aid plan that will invest more than £1 million in the Kingdom of Siam in the next 5 years is listed, of which the coastal cities of Sihanoukville and Kampot in the Cambodia region of the Kingdom of Siam will invest more than £200,000. Hespert von bought Phu Quoc Island in the southern part of Cambodia from the Kingdom of Siam for £200,000, and the effective date will be from May 20th. Phu Quoc Island is located between South Vietnam and the Cambodia region of the Kingdom of Siam. The soil of this island is average, and the island value in the era of agricultural civilization is not great. Therefore, the Kingdom of Siam has little control over this island. The French Empire originally wanted to occupy it last time, but the military exercises of the Dutch and British navies finally gave up this idea. Phu Quoc Island is roughly triangular, about 50 kilometers long from north to south, 25 kilometers from east to west, and covers an area of 590 square kilometers. He cited the example that Cambodia's coastline is only 12 kilometers. Phnom Penh, the largest city in Cambodia, is 150 kilometers away. Ho Chi Minh City in South Vietnam is 280 kilometers away, and Bangkok, the capital of the Kingdom of Siam, is 500 kilometers away. Therefore, if it were not for the Netherlands' proposal, I believe that many people in the Kingdom of Siam would not know the existence of this island. £200,000? It's not a small amount. It's only 30 kilometers away from the coast of South Vietnam near the French Empire. It's too dangerous. If it's not sold, maybe France will occupy it soon, and then the Kingdom of Siam will really have nothing. Moreover, if it is sold, it can also allow the Netherlands to have more bases there, and even establish a Dutch military base on the sea to prevent the French Empire in the east from advancing westward from the sea. Rama IV felt that he had killed two birds with one stone. So with Anna's deliberate approval, although Chulalongkorn opposed it in his heart, he was forced by the situation, so he agreed to this territorial transaction. Therefore, the deal was quickly approved, and the Netherlands gained an additional base here. It only took a few days from Jakarta in East India to complete the handover, and all this was done under the nose of the French Empire occupying South Vietnam and eastern Cambodia. Invisibly, the Netherlands only spent £200,000 to get such a large piece of land, which made the French Empire very angry. However, when seeing that the Dutch battleships were actually cruising around the surrounding islands, and that the Netherlands actually sent more than 5,000 troops to the island, although more than 3,000 of them were East Indian native troops and only 2,000 Dutch troops, facing the French expeditionary force that the Kingdom of Siam had already struggled with, they could only sigh at the sea. I sighed that the Netherlands really knows how to make a bargain. However, are only the Dutch really good at it? That's not right. On May 16, 1867, Secretary of State Seward of the United States visited St. Petersburg, Russia. During his visit, he negotiated with Prime Minister of Russia Gorchakov. Finally, Russia and the United States reached a territorial transaction agreement. The United States and Russia agreed to a deal of $10 million, £2 million British pounds, including a handling fee of $200,000, and the land contract took effect on October 18, 1867. The 370,000 square kilometers of Kamchatka Peninsula was about to fall into the hands of the United States. When the news came out, Europe suddenly looked at the direction of the Russian Empire with some complexity. Kamchatka Peninsula, like the Phu Quoc Island of the Kingdom of Siam that the Netherlands had just purchased, was an extremely unfamiliar place in Europe. If it weren't for the fact that these two transactions were in the Far East where Napoleon III launched a war, they would have never heard of it. However, ordinary people quickly forgot about it, but the European and American high-level officials were staring at the map in a daze. William IV and his Privy Council members were naturally the same. It makes sense that the Netherlands would choose Phu Quoc Island. After all, it is relatively close to the Kingdom of Siam, one of the Dutch Far East markets. If Phu Quoc Island develops, it will be enough for the Netherlands to have a trade transit station there. William IV remembered the role of the southern administrative regions in his previous life, so he was impulsive about this deal and put it into the Far East visit itinerary of the policy he spent on. Unexpectedly, everything went so smoothly, which was beyond his expectations. Phu Quoc Island can further consolidate the Netherlands' position in Southeast Asia. Regardless of whether this organization is established in the future, the influence of the Netherlands is enough to run through the entire modern history of Southeast Asia. The Netherlands can learn from the United Kingdom and make Phu Quoc Island prosperous, attracting the Kingdom of Siam and the South Vietnamese, Malays, Filipinos, and even the French and British there, and become a pearl with great influence in the Netherlands. Infiltrate the countries there, and even, William IV thought, if the future Cambodia is peacefully separated from the Kingdom of Siam by the Dutch and becomes a vassal state of the Netherlands, wouldn't it be more wonderful? Thinking about it, William IV couldn't help but be moved. However, when I saw that the United States actually reached a territorial deal with the Russian Empire, I couldn't help but be shocked. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.